My son thought he could erase 40 years of my sweat with a single text message. He told me I was out. He told me I was obsolete. He didn't know that. While he was popping champagne to celebrate my retirement, I was quietly pressing a button that would turn his entire world into dust. By sunrise, he had called me 55 times. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below. Have you ever been pushed out of something you built with your own hands? Just yes or no is fine. Now, a quick note, some details in this story have been dramatized for the telling. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental, but the heart of what this story means is very real. And yet there I stood on corrugated steel at 2 in the afternoon, checking the bolting on the rooftop condenser units. I never trusted anyone else to know the difference between a job that was finished and a job that was finished right. My foreman, a solid man named Luther, who had been beside me since the days we mixed concrete by hand, tried to pass me a bottle of water. I waved him off. I needed to feel that heat. It reminded me I was still here, still capable still, the hardest working man in Houston. My phone buzzed against my chest, sharp, insistent cutting, right through the racket of the hydraulic drills. I pulled it out expecting a supplier update, or maybe a weather alert. It was a message from Dion, my son, my only child, the boy I had sent through the finest business schools this country had to offer. The boy who wore suits that cost more than my father earned in a full year. The text was short. It was brutal. Board meeting just finished. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO. We are pivoting to a digital-first strategy. The vote was unanimous. Lucinda has already sent movers to pack your office. Do not come back to the building. We are moving on without you. I stared at the screen. The sun hammered the back of my neck, but my blood went cold. No apology, no explanation. Just a sterile corporate dismissal delivered by text message. He didn't even have the spine to look me in the eye. He didn't have the decency to let me hear his voice. I looked out over the roof's edge at the city spread below me. I saw the crane tower we built in '98. I saw the bridge we reinforced in 2004. Every piece of steel in this city had my fingerprints on it, and now the boy who had never lifted anything heavier than a tablet was telling me I was finished. Luther looked over at me, worry carving deep lines into his dusty face. He asked if everything was all right. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I told him everything was fine. I lied. I crossed to the service elevator with a calm that frightened even me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. A man who builds skyscrapers understands something about destruction. If you want to bring a building down, you don't go after the windows. You go after the foundation. I drove my truck home, not to the sprawling estate in River Oaks, where Dion lived the house I had bought him as a wedding gift when he married Lucinda. I paid the property taxes on that house. I paid for the landscaping. I drove instead to my own place, a sturdy brick rancher I had bought 30 years ago, with my late wife. It was quiet inside. The air conditioning held a low, steady hum. I walked into my study and shut the door behind me. I settled into my chair at my heavy walnut desk, the same desk where I sat night after night, teaching Dion how to read blueprints. The same desk where I signed the checks for his tuition. I opened my laptop. Dion had an MBA. He knew about marketing funnels and brand synergy. He knew how to talk to investors in air-conditioned boardrooms. But what Dion didn't know was how I had structured the banking. He assumed that wearing the CEO title meant he controlled the money. He was wrong. I logged into the back end of our corporate banking system, not through the interface the accounting department used, but through the master admin portal. I had built that access point in 1984, back when digital banking was still the stuff of science fiction. I had held onto the master key all these years. It was a failsafe I hoped I would never have to use, designed to stop hackers or hostile takeovers. Today, the hostile force was my own flesh and blood. I looked at the balances. The operating account held $12 million. The payroll line of credit was fully funded. The investment accounts were healthy. Dion and Lucinda intended to put that money toward a rebrand. They wanted to scrub the Grayfield name and swap it for something sleek and modern, something that didn't sound like a black construction company rooted in the South. Lucinda had called my legacy dusty, said it needed to be sanitized. I didn't hesitate. My hand was steady. I clicked on the operating account. I selected the option to freeze all outgoing transactions pending an internal audit. Any withdrawal over $100 would require a physical signature from the original founder. Then I moved to the credit cards. Dayon carried a corporate American Express black card. Lucinda had a supplementary card she treated as her personal allowance. I pulled up the transaction history. It was a nauseating display of greed. $4,800 at a boutique, $2,400 for a dinner, $900 for dog grooming. They were bleeding the company while pointing the finger at me. I clicked suspend. The screen flashed a confirmation. Status inactive. I eased back in my leather chair. The silence in that room had weight. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, deep and hollow, where my pride used to sit. But then those words from the text floated back to me. Do not come back. That phrase hardened my resolve the way cured concrete hardens. There is no going back once it sets. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was teaching them the first rule of construction. You never tear out the ground you're standing on. Across town, the first domino was about to fall. I knew Lucinda's schedule better than she did because I was the one paying the bills. It was Tuesday. Tuesday was her day at the Radiant Spa, the kind of place that wraps you in seaweed and tells you that you're a goddess. I could picture it without any effort at all. Lucinda at the front desk, draped in a plush white robe, her skin fresh from a facial that cost more than my foreman brought home in a week. She'd hand that heavy black card to the receptionist. With a dismissive flick of her manicured hand, eyes already drifting to her phone, scrolling the likes on her latest post about the company's bold new era. The receptionist would swipe the card. The machine would beep, that sharp, ugly sound of rejection. They'd try it again. The receptionist would offer that tight, apologetic smile. There seems to be a problem. Lucinda would laugh. She'd say, that's impossible. She'd say, do you know who I am? She'd say, run it again. They would run it again. Declined, reported lost, or stolen. Please confiscate. Lucinda's face would go that shade of red that fought with her blonde hair. She'd have to dig into her purse. She'd have to hunt for her personal debit card, the one tied to an account I didn't fund. The one that was probably empty because she spent every dollar she ever touched. I poured myself a glass of scotch, took a slow sip. The burn was welcome. It anchored me. My phone lit up on the desk for the first time in hours. The name on the screen read, Dion Grayfield. Lucinda had called him. She'd screamed at him, demanded to know why she was being humiliated at the spa. Dayon, in his arrogance, had probably told her it was a glitch, had probably told her he'd handle it with one call to the bank. He'd probably placed that call 5 minutes ago, and the bank had probably told him he had no authority to override a security freeze initiated by the master admin. I watched the phone ring, watched his face fill the screen, a photo I took at his graduation. He looked so proud that day, so loaded with promise. Now he was just a man who didn't understand gravity. I didn't reach for the phone. I let it ring through to voicemail, then it rang again immediately, and again. He was figuring out that the doors were locked, that the engine wouldn't turn over, that the old man he'd pushed out the door was the only one who had the keys. I took another sip of scotch. The sun was sinking now, pulling long shadows across the room. Darkness was settling in, and for the first time all day, I smiled. Let them call. Let them panic. The lesson had only just begun. Morning came with the deceptive cheerfulness of a postcard day in Houston. The sky was a hard, clear blue, and the humidity hadn't yet climbed to its punishing afternoon weight. I sat in my home office in front of a fresh pot of black coffee and a bank of monitors, showing the live security feed from Grayfield Holdings headquarters. I had raised that building a decade ago. I knew every rivet in the steel frame, every inch of wiring threaded through those walls. I had designed the entrance to make a statement, a monument to black excellence in an industry that had spent years trying to keep us out. Today that entrance was about to become the stage for a tragedy my own son had written. At 9 o'clock sharp, a cavalcade of luxury vehicles swept up to the curb. Out front, leading the procession, was the black Porsche Cayenne the company leased for the CEO. Dayon climbed out of the driver's seat looking like a man who believed he had just claimed the world as his own. He had on a charcoal gray bespoke suit that cost $4,500. His Italian leather shoes caught the light like polished mirrors. He straightened his silk tie and checked himself in the car window. He looked the part, modern, sharp, expensive. He looked like money. He did not look like a man who had ever touched a bag of mortar. From the passenger side, Lucinda stepped out in a white power suit that was crisp and immaculate. She had on sunglasses despite the fact that the building's shadow fell across the entire sidewalk. She carried a designer briefcase I knew to be empty, because Lucinda did not actually perform any work for the company. Her role was optics. She was there to stand beside investors and smile, performing the part of a matriarch presiding over an empire she had never helped construct. 3 men in dark gray suits followed close behind. These were the investors from Munich, the Deutsche Capital Group. Dayan had spent 6 months courting them. He had told them Greyfield Holdings was poised to push into international markets. He had pitched a vision of abandoning government contracts in favor of high-tech smart cities. He called it a paradigm shift. I called it a fantasy. I leaned forward in my chair and turned up the volume on the surveillance feed. The microphone at the front desk was high quality. I could catch the click of their heels on the pavement and the easy confidence in Dayan's voice as he swept a hand toward the building's glass facade. "Gentlemen, welcome to the future of Greyfield Holdings," Dayan said. His delivery was smooth rehearsed. He sounded like a motivational speaker at a conference. "We are shedding the skin of a traditional construction firm. What you see in front of you is the command center of a global infrastructure technology brand. The previous leadership was fixed on bricks and mortar. I am focused on data and integration. Please follow me." He moved toward the revolving glass doors with the stride of a man who thought he was returning to his kingdom. The German investors followed with polite nods. They were serious men, precise men. They valued order and measurable outcomes far more than they valued buzzwords. They cared about one thing: returns. Dayan slipped a hand into his pocket and produced his security badge. Platinum level. That card used to grant him access to every floor, every server room, every safe in the building. He stepped up to the card reader mounted on the steel pillar beside the doors and held it up with a casual flick of his wrist, fully expecting the familiar green light and welcoming beep. Instead, a harsh electronic buzz, a red light on the panel. The glass doors held firm. Dayan's brow creased. He examined the card, wiped it against his sleeve as though it might be dirty, and tried again. Buzz, red light, access denied. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The bitterness sat pleasantly on my tongue. I watched the crack open in his perfect mask. Lucinda appeared at his elbow, her smile drawn tight as a wire. "What is the problem, Dion?" She hissed, barely moving her lips, keeping her voice low enough that the investors couldn't catch it. "Open the door. It is hot out here." "It is just a glitch," Dayan said, forcing a laugh. He turned toward the investors. "My apologies, gentlemen. We updated our security protocols this morning. High-tech systems can be temperamental. One moment." He tapped the card against the reader again, harder this time, as if willpower could override digital code. The result did not change. The red light blinked slow and indifferent, mocking him. Inside the lobby, seated behind the broad marble desk, was Vernon. Vernon was 65 years old, a retired Marine sergeant, 2 tours served. I had hired him 2 decades ago, when nobody else would give him work because of his limp. Vernon was not simply a security guard. He was the gatekeeper. He knew every employee by name. He knew whose wife was in the hospital and whose kid had just made the honor roll. He had deep respect for authority. He had deeper respect for integrity. Dayan pressed his face against the glass and waved frantically to get Vernon's attention. Vernon glanced up from his newspaper. He removed his reading glasses, unhurried, deliberate. He did not scramble. He did not jump. He rose with the measured ease of a man who has faced actual danger and is not rattled by a boy in an expensive suit. Vernon walked to the glass doors and stopped on the other side, just inches from Dayan's face. Dayan shouted. The thick safety glass swallowed most of the sound, but the desperation behind it came through clearly. "The system is down. Let us in. I have guests." Vernon did not reach for the override switch. He did not unlock the doors. Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and drew out a folded sheet of paper. He opened it with care, smoothed it flat, and pressed it against the glass at eye level for Dayan to read. It was a legal document printed on heavy bond paper bearing the official seal of the county clerk. At the top, in bold black letters, "Notice of lease termination and eviction." Dayan's eyes tracked across the page. I could see his lips moving as he read. I knew every word in that document because I had dictated it to my lawyer Ezra Fendall at 3 a.m. It stated plainly that the building at 800 Navigation Boulevard was the sole personal property of Clifton Greyfield. It stated that Greyfield Holdings, the corporate entity, was nothing more than a tenant. It stated that due to a violation of the morality clause and failure to satisfy the updated security deposit, that lease was immediately voided. It stated that all employees of the tenant were barred from entry until further notice. Dayon pulled back from the glass as if the document had stung him. He looked up at Vernon. "Vernon, open this door right now." He snapped, composure completely gone. The polished motivational speaker had evaporated. What remained was a spoiled child hearing no for the first time in his life. "I am the CEO of this company. I sign your checks. Open the door or you are fired. Do you hear me? You are fired." Vernon leaned in close to the glass and said something. I couldn't make it out through the barrier, but I didn't need to. I know Vernon. He would have said, "You don't sign my checks anymore, son. Your daddy does." Then Vernon turned his back. He walked to his desk, settled into his chair, and picked up his newspaper. The finality of it was brutal, a complete dismissal. Dayon stood there, arms still raised, mouth still open. Lucinda had her fingers wrapped around his sleeve nails, pressing into the fabric of his expensive suit jacket, her face flushed deep with anger and humiliation. Her eyes darted around, checking who was watching. People were watching. Employees arriving for the workday had gathered along the sidewalk in clusters, whispering. Pedestrians had slowed to stare. The German investors exchanged a glance, a look of pure professional disdain. The leader of the group, a silver-haired man named Herr Baumgart, stepped forward. He checked his watch. He looked at the sealed doors. He looked at the sweating, unraveling man who had billed himself as a visionary. "Mr. Grayfield," Herr Baumgart said, his voice cold and precise, "there appears to be a significant discrepancy between your presentation and your reality. We were promised a seamless transition and a stable foundation. We see neither." "But wait," Dayon stammered, pivoting toward him, perspiration already visible on his forehead. "This is just a misunderstanding. My father is having a senile episode. He is trying to sabotage me. I will call the police. We will have this sorted out in 10 minutes. Sir, please let us step next door to the coffee shop and go over the portfolio." "We do not conduct business on the sidewalk," Herr Baumgart said. "And we do not invest in companies that cannot open their own front doors. We are withdrawing our letter of intent. Do not contact us again." With a single sharp nod, all three investors turned and walked away without a backward glance. They flagged a cab and disappeared into the morning traffic, taking with them the $10 million capital injection Dayon needed to keep the company breathing. Dayon watched them go. His shoulders dropped. The air left him all at once. He turned to Lucinda. She slapped his arm hard. "Do something!" she snapped. "Fix this. I am not standing out here like a beggar." Dayon yanked out his phone, hands shaking badly enough that he nearly fumbled it. He hit speed dial number 1. On my desk, my phone lit up and vibrated against the walnut wood. The screen showed his name, Dayon Grayfield. I watched it ring. I did not reach for it. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. I pictured him out there on the hot concrete. The sun was climbing higher. The humidity was starting to press down. He was locked out of the air conditioning. He was locked out of the bathroom. He was locked out of his power. My phone rang a third time, then a fourth. I took a bite of a biscuit and chewed it slowly. By the 10th call, I could feel the panic taking hold. He was understanding now that this was not a bluff. He was understanding that the building was not simply a structure made of glass and steel. It was leverage. He had moved to seize the company, but had forgotten that the company lived inside a house I owned. By the 15th call, Lucinda would be screaming in his other ear. She'd be laying the blame on him. She'd be asking about her spa appointment. She'd be demanding to know why her credit cards had gone dead. The pressure cooker was beginning to hiss. By the 20th call, the truth would have settled over him completely. He was not a king. He was a trespasser. I looked at the camera feed one final time. Dayon was kicking the glass door, screaming at an empty lobby. Vernon didn't even glance up. I reached over and shut off the monitor. The screen went dark. I had seen what I needed to see. The first wall of his defense had already fallen. Now it was time to tear down the rest of the fortress. I picked up my phone not to answer him, but to dial my lawyer. Phase 2 needed to begin. The war for my legacy had officially started. The vibration against the walnut desk was constant. Not a ringtone this time, a relentless stream of notifications buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets. I picked the phone up and saw that I had been tagged in a live stream on social media. The account was Lucinda's. The caption read, "The truth about Grayfield Holdings, breaking my silence." I had no desire to watch it. I wanted to hurl the phone into the lake behind my house. But in war, you have to know where the enemy is positioned. You have to see the weapon aimed at you before you can dismantle it. I tapped the screen. Lucinda came into view. She was seated in the guest bedroom of the mansion I paid for. The lighting was soft and deliberately arranged to make her look angelic. She had traded her usual heavy makeup for a bare face. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, messy bun. She had on a plain gray t-shirt. She looked tired. She looked fragile. It was a perfect costume. She brushed a tear from her cheek, looked straight into the camera lens, and let her voice tremble. "Hi, everyone," she said. "I did not want to do this. I really didn't. But I can't stay silent anymore. You all saw what happened at the headquarters this morning. You saw my husband Dion trying to lead this company into the future, and you saw him being locked out by a man who refuses to let go of power." She drew a slow breath. She looked down at her hands. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Clifton Grayfield is a legend. We all know that. But he is not the man he used to be. For the past year, he has been struggling. His memory is fading. He has become paranoid. He has become aggressive. We tried to help him step down with dignity. We offered him a golden parachute. We wanted him to rest. But he refused. He believes he is the only one who matters. And now he is holding the company hostage. He is hurting the employees. He is hurting his own son. It breaks my heart to see Dion this way. Dion only wants to modernize. He wants to create jobs. But his father is trapped in the past. This is abuse. That is what it is, financial and emotional abuse from a man who has lost touch with reality. I watched the viewer count climb on the screen. 5,000 viewers, 10,000 viewers. The comments scrolled so fast they became a smear of hostility. Cancel Clifton Grayfield. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Save the company Dion. Put the old man in a home. I read them. Every comment was a blade. These were people who had never laid eyes on me. They did not know I was first on the job site at 5 in the morning. They did not know I had paid for the funerals of my employees' parents. They did not know I had built this company while absorbing racism that would have shattered them completely. All they saw was a crying blonde woman and a young, good-looking CEO. To them, I was nothing more than a bitter old villain. Lucinda pressed on with her performance. She sniffled. She looked up with wide, pleading eyes. "Please," she said, "if you believe in progress, if you believe in the future, stand with us. Stand with Dion. Do not let one man's ego destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of families. We are fighting for you. We love you all." The video ended. I set the phone down. My hand was trembling not with fear, but with rage. A cold, hard rage that sat in my gut like a stone dropped into still water. She had played the victim. She had weaponized my age. She had called me senile. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I did not go online to argue. I did not type a comment. I did not record a response. I walked to the garage and got in my truck. I had a meeting to attend, not with a publicist, with a shark. 40 minutes later, I stepped into the office of Ezra Fendall. Ezra and I went back 30 years. We were an unlikely pair, a large black man from the construction yards and a short Jewish man with glasses thick enough to start a fire. But Ezra was the only lawyer in Houston I trusted with my life. He had no interest in public opinion. He dealt in statutes and contracts. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. The office carried the scent of old paper and peppermint tea. Ezra didn't bother with pleasantries. He had already watched the video. A tablet sat on his desk, frozen on a still frame of Lucinda's manufactured tears. "They are playing dirty," Ezra said. His voice was gravelly and calm. "Defamation suits take years. You do not have years. The court of public opinion moves faster than any courtroom. If we go after her for slander, you come across as a bully going after a weeping woman. We lose." I nodded. "I know. I don't want to sue her for talking. I want to stop them from breathing." Ezra smiled thin and sharp. "Then we don't attack the lie. We attack the truth. Like, what is the one thing Dion needs more than money?" I said. "Credibility." "Exactly," Ezra said. He pushed back from his desk and crossed to the filing cabinet. He drew out a thick folder. "And where does that credibility come from?" "It comes from the name on the building. It comes from the history. It comes from you." He dropped the folder onto the desk with a sharp crack. "Dion thinks he took over the company," Ezra continued, "but he never read the fine print in the incorporation documents from 1991. Grayfield Holdings Inc. is an operating entity. but the intellectual property that trademarks the logo and the name Grayfield Construction Legacy are owned by a separate holding company. Do you know who owns that holding company? Enidisporus, that am almost as deep bow. I looked at him. I do. You do, Ezra said. You licensed the name to the operating company. It was a revocable license, revocable at will by the licensor. I leaned forward. The anger in my gut was shifting, hardening into something closer to satisfaction. So I can take my name back. Ezra drew a silver fountain pen from his pocket. You can strip them down to nothing, Clifton. You can issue an immediate cease and desist. They cannot use the Grayfield name. They cannot put the logo on their letterhead. They cannot use the website. They cannot even answer the phone as Grayfield Holdings. Without that name, what are they? They are just two people with a mountain of debt and no history, I said. Exactly, Ezra said. He slid a document across the desk toward me. Sign here. I signed. The ink was black and permanent. With that signature, I wasn't just entering a legal dispute. I was erasing their identity. Lucinda wanted to speak about the future, fine. She could build whatever future she liked, so long as my name wasn't there to pay for her manicures. While the ink dried on the cease and desist order, the second wave of my counterattack was already landing. Across the city, Dion was sitting in a coffee shop, trying to pick up the wreckage of his morning. He was on the phone with the vice president of commercial lending at Lone Star Commerce Bank. I knew this because I had just received an alert that the bank had pulled my credit file. I knew precisely what was unfolding. Dion was desperate. The German investors had walked. He needed the $10 million line of credit that had been pre-approved the week before. He needed it to make payroll. He needed it to cover the vendors. He needed it to keep up the lease on the Porsche he was sitting in at that very moment. I could picture the conversation clearly. Dion would be using his CEO voice, measured, confident, and control. He would be telling the banker that the disruption at the office was temporary. He would be saying the viral video was actually generating sympathy and engagement. He would be insisting the company had never been stronger. Mr. Drumfeld, the banker, would be listening without expression. Drumfeld was a man who dealt in numbers. He had no use for Instagram metrics. He cared about collateral. Mr. Grayfield, Drumfeld would say, his tone dry and professional. We have completed our review of the loan facility. When this $10 million was approved, it rested on the personal guarantee of Clifton Grayfield, on his assets, his track record, and his continued role as the principal operator. Dion would cut in. But I am the CEO now. I have an MBA. The board approved the transition. The company is the borrower here, not my father. That is technically correct, Drumfeld would reply. However, the loan covenants are specific. Section 4, paragraph B, states clearly that any material change in executive leadership triggers a full review of the credit facility. The removal of Clifton Grayfield constitutes exactly that kind of trigger event. Without his personal guarantee, the risk profile of Grayfield Holdings exceeds our tolerance. Dion would begin to sweat. He would feel the floor giving way beneath him. But we have contracts. We have receivables. Receivables tied to agreements won under your father's name, Drumfeld would answer. We have also received legal notice regarding a trademark dispute. If you cannot operate under the Grayfield trade name, you are effectively a new entity with no credit history. A silence would fall over the line, heavy and suffocating. Then Drumfeld would deliver the final blow. We are retracting the offer. The $10 million line of credit is canceled effective immediately. Furthermore, we are placing a hold on the existing overdraft protection until this leadership dispute reaches resolution. We advise you to deposit sufficient funds to cover any outstanding checks within 24 hours. Good day, Mr. Grayfield. The line would go dead. I sat in Ezra's office and stared at the signed document on the desk. I felt no joy. What I felt was the heavy, grinding weight of necessity. I had just cut off the oxygen to my own creation. I had ensured that my son would have nothing to his name by morning. Ezra looked at me. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a crystal glass and slid it across. To tough love, he said quietly. I picked up the glass. I didn't drink to love. I drank to survival. To the truth, I said. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dion. Dad, call the bank. Please, they are making a mistake. I read it twice. He still didn't understand. He thought it was an error. He thought someone had gotten their wires crossed. He had not yet grasped that this was the weight of his own ambition falling back on him. I typed a reply. My fingers did not shake. You wanted the company, you got it. But you don't get my name and you don't get my credit. You are on your own, CEO. I hit send. This war was no longer just about a building or a title. It was about reality. And reality was about to hit Dion and Lucinda like a wrecking ball. They had public sympathy for now, but sympathy doesn't pay the electric bill, and tomorrow the lights were going to go out. I stood and shook Ezra's hand. I had one more stop to make. Lucinda had claimed in her video that I was hurting the employees. She had lied. And I was about to prove it in a way she could never spin on TikTok. I walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. The real work was only beginning. Let them have the internet. I had the streets. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10 times. Each chime was a heavy metallic thud that rolled through the dark, empty house. I was in my leather armchair with the lights off, watching a pair of headlights inch up the driveway through the darkness. I recognized that engine, the black Porsche Cayenne, but it wasn't moving with the bold speed of a CEO. It crept up the asphalt slowly and quietly, like a hearse making a delivery. Dion and Lucinda had come to my home. I did not get up to unlock the door. I sat and waited until the bell rang twice, hesitant, almost polite. I walked to the door and pulled it open. The night air outside was thick and humid, but the temperature on that porch dropped 10 degrees the moment I saw their faces. These were not the same two people who had screamed at the security guard that morning. Something had been knocked out of them. Dion had shed the $4,500 suit. He stood there in a soft cashmere sweater and jeans, looking like a college kid who had come home with bad news. Lucinda had wiped away the heavy makeup from her video. She wore a simple dress and flat shoes. She held a bottle of wine with both hands, offering it up the way you'd offer something to a deity you had offended. "Hi, Dad," Dion said. His voice was soft, the voice he had used at 10 years old when a baseball went through a window. "Can we come in? We just want to talk." I stepped aside. I said nothing. I let them walk into the house they had been planning to sell out from under me. Lucinda moved to the kitchen island and set the wine down. It was a bottle of Merlot. I recognized the label, a $12 bottle from the grocery store. An insult dressed up as a peace offering. They knew I kept a cellar stocked with vintage Bordeaux. But they brought this because they had me figured for a simple man, a bricklayer who got lucky. Someone who wouldn't know the difference. I knew the difference. "I am so sorry about today," Lucinda said. She came toward me with her arms open and pulled me into a hug. Her body was rigid. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. "We were just so stressed. The business, the pressure, we lost our heads. You know how much we love you, right?" I stood still as a post. I did not return the embrace. I let her finish her scene. Dion came over and set a hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it. "Look, Dad," he said. "We made a mistake, a serious mistake. We should never have tried to push you out like that. We were scared. The market is moving so fast. We convinced ourselves we had to act quickly. But the truth is we need you. We need your wisdom." I looked at my son. I looked into his eyes and searched for something real, the toddler who used to fall asleep on my chest, the teenager who spent summers helping me sand floors. I found nothing. What stared back at me was a reflection of his wife's ambition. "Sit down," I said. My voice was gravel. We moved to the living room. Lucinda poured the wine into 3 glasses and handed me one. Her hand carried a slight tremor, a small, telling shake that her composed expression couldn't hide. "We have a proposal," Dion said. He reached into his leather satchel and produced a thick stapled document flagged with yellow sticky notes. "We want a compromise. We want you to stay on as chairman emeritus. You keep the title, you keep the office, you keep the respect, but we handle the day-to-day. We just need the accounts unfrozen so we can pay the workers. You don't want the workers to suffer, do you, Dad?" He was using my own people as a weapon against me. He knew that was where I was soft. Lucinda leaned in and rested her hand on my knee. "It is just a formality," she said. "A limited power of attorney. It simply gives Dion the authority to sign checks and manage the bank loans while you enjoy your retirement. You deserve to rest, Clifton. You have carried so much for so long. Let us take the burden from you now." I looked down at the document. The title page read, "Durable Power of Attorney and Asset Management Agreement." I reached into my pocket and drew out my reading glasses. I put them on slowly. I took a sip of the cheap wine. It tasted like vinegar and lies. I opened the document. The room went silent. The only sounds were the wood crackling in the fireplace and the steady tick of the clock. I could hear Dion breathing shallow and fast. I turned the page. I read the preamble. Standard legal boilerplate. I turned another page. Lucinda shifted in her seat. She crossed her legs, then uncrossed them. I read slowly. I traced each line with my finger. I played the part they needed me to play, the confused old man struggling to keep up. "What does this word mean right here?" I asked, tapping my finger on a paragraph on page 4. Dayon leaned over my shoulder. "That's just legal jargon, Dad. Fiduciary. It means I'm obligated to act in your best interest." I gave a slow nod. I turned the page. I knew exactly what I was hunting for. I was hunting for the snare, and I found it, page 7, paragraph 12, section C. The language was dense and deliberately so written to make your eyes glaze over and your brain skip ahead. But those words were lethal. It read, "The principal hereby grants the agent full authority to transfer, liquidate, or retitle any and all real property held in the principal's name to the agent or an entity controlled by the agent for the purpose of estate planning and asset protection. This authority is irrevocable and survives the incapacity or death of the principal." That was not an asset management agreement. It was a holdup in legal clothing. If I put my signature on that line, Dion could move the deed to this house, the headquarters, and my personal savings into his own name by the next morning. He could put me out on the street and I would have zero legal ground to stand on because I would have handed him the permission myself. I looked up. Dayon was smiling, tight, eager, hopeful. So I said, "You want to protect my assets?" "Yes." Lucinda jumped in immediately. "Exactly that. We want everything to stay within the family. We want to shield you from tax exposure and liability. It's for your own good, Clifton." I closed the document, held it in both hands. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon someone had gift-wrapped. "You know," I said, "I remember the day you came into this world, Dion. It was 1990. I was on a job site pouring the foundation for the First National Bank. Your mother called me. I left the concrete mixer running. I ran to that hospital with dust still on my boots. I held you in my arms, and I made a promise that I would build a world where you never had to grind the way I did." Dayon's smile faltered. "Dad, please. I gave you everything. I kept going. I gave you the finest schools. I gave you cars. I handed you a VP title you never had to bleed for. And now you walk into my home, drink my wine, and slide a piece of paper across the table asking me to cut my own throat." "What are you talking about?" Dayon stammered. I rose to my feet. My knees popped. I crossed the room to the fireplace. The flames were alive, hungry, and bright. "This is not a power of attorney," I said. My voice climbed. "This is a death warrant. Paragraph 12 gives you the right to seize my house. It gives you the right to take my land. It gives you the right to strip me down to nothing." Lucinda shot up from her seat. The color had drained clean out of her face. "You're misreading it," she said. "You're not a lawyer, Clifton. You're confused." "I am not confused," I roared. The words bounced off every wall in that room. "I may be old. I may be a bricklayer, but I know how to read a blueprint. And I know when a foundation is rotten." I held the document over the fire. "Dad, don't," Dayon yelled. He lunged. I let it go. The paper met the logs. The dry edges curled back in an instant. The yellow sticky notes went black. The flames climbed up the sides of the pages, swallowing every lie and every line of legal maneuvering. We all watched it burn. We watched the future they had drawn up together dissolve into gray ash. Lucinda made a sound, something guttural animal. She looked at the fire, then she looked at me, and the mask came all the way off. The devoted daughter-in-law was gone. The wounded victim from that video was gone. "You stupid old man!" She screamed, her face twisting into something I hadn't seen before. "You selfish, arrogant old man. Do you think you can take it with you? You are going to die soon. And what will happen then? We are just trying to save what is left before you ruin it with your senility." I looked at her, steady, calm. "Get out of my house." "No," she shouted. She stepped toward me, finger leveled at my chest. "You owe us this. Dion has thrown away his best years waiting for you to die. We deserve this money. We deserve this company. We are the ones with the education. We are the ones who can actually hold a proper conversation with investors, not you. You are nothing but a glorified laborer squeezed into a suit. You are an embarrassment." Dayon grabbed her arm. "Lucinda, stop," he said. "Don't touch me." She shook him off. Then she wheeled back toward me. "Look at you. You think you're a king. You are nothing but a lucky construction worker who should have stepped aside 10 years ago. You are holding us back. You are holding the brand back. Nobody wants to sit across a table from a dinosaur. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Her words hung in the air, heavy with a prejudice she had managed to bury for 5 years. She didn't just resent me for the money. She resented me for what I was. She despised the fact that she had to come to a black man from the wrong side of the tracks to fund her life. "Is that all?" I asked. Lucinda was breathing hard. Her chest heaved. She heard what she'd said. She understood there was no taking it back. Dayon looked at me. He looked terrified. "Dad, she didn't mean it. She's just upset." I looked at my son. He was still running interference for her. Even after she'd insulted his father, even after she'd insulted his own blood and heritage, he didn't have the spine to stand up. He was too weak for that. Too weak to be a Grayfield. "Get out," I said again. Low, deadly quiet. "And take your cheap wine with you." Lucinda snatched her purse. She marched to the door without a backward glance. Dayon hung back a moment. He stared at the fireplace where the document had become nothing but glowing embers. Then he looked at me. "Dad, go," I said. He turned and followed his wife. I heard the front door slam shut. I heard the Porsche engine growl to life. They tore out of the driveway tires, screaming against the pavement. I stood alone in that living room. The fire crackled on. A profound sadness settled over me like a coat. It was the sadness of a man who understands that his legacy has ended with him. I had raised buildings that could take a hurricane, but I had failed to raise a son who could stand up against greed. I walked to the window. I watched their taillights vanish into the dark. They thought the fight was finished because I burned that paper. They thought I was only playing defense. What they didn't know was that I had already set the next phase in motion. Tomorrow was payday, and tomorrow Dayon was going to learn that respect is not something you inherit. It has to be earned. And the cost of that lesson was about to get very steep. Friday morning came in with a quiet that was louder than any scream. In the construction trade, Friday is the only day that truly counts. It's the day the sweat converts to bread. It's the day the sore backs and the blistered hands find their answer in the ping of a phone notification. For 20 years, that notification had come at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. But this Friday at 6 o'clock, there was no ping, no deposit, only the hollow silence of a frozen bank account. I sat in my kitchen with my coffee watching the morning news. I didn't need to be anywhere near the office to know precisely what was unfolding. I knew my crew's rhythm by heart. At 6:10, there would be confusion men staring at their apps convinced it was a glitch. By 6:30, calls would be flooding into payroll. But nobody in payroll would pick up because I'd locked them out of the system as well. By 7 o'clock, the confusion would harden into fear. By 8 o'clock, the fear would ignite into rage. And rage always needs somewhere to land. Dayon had made a fatal miscalculation. He believed he could shelter himself behind a corporate email address. He thought a memo citing technical difficulties would hold the line. But construction workers don't read memos, they read actions. And when you reach into a man's pocket and pull the food out of it, you'd better be ready for what comes next. By 9 o'clock, the scene at Grayfield Holdings headquarters had turned chaotic. But the real storm was gathering in River Oaks. My phone buzzed with a security alert from the perimeter fence of the mansion I had bought for Dayon. I pulled up the camera feed. It looked like a siege. 50 trucks were sitting on the manicured lawn. Not gleaming corporate vehicles. These were the dented, road-worn F-150S and Silverados belonging to the subcontractors, the drywallers, the electricians, the framers men who lived from one check to the next. Men with mortgages coming due on Monday. They were at the front gate, both hands wrapped around the iron bars, shaking them. They weren't chanting. They were demanding their money. I switched the camera over to the front entrance. I could make out Dayon through the glass sidelight. He was pacing back and forth in the hallway in his pajamas. He looked like a cornered animal. Lucinda was behind him, one hand clutching her stomach. Her face knotted with terror. She had her phone out, probably dialing the police. But the police move slowly when the dispute is civil, a matter of unpaid wages. And no patrol car stops 100 furious men who are only trying to feed their families. Dayon's phone was going off continuously in his hand. I knew who he was trying to reach. He wanted me to step in and clean up his mess. He wanted the money to appear as if from thin air. But I was not there to perform miracles. I was there to teach, and the lesson on the schedule was accountability. Prestige doesn't fill a refrigerator. A brand refresh doesn't cover the rent. Only cash does that. I watched a brick arc over the gate and crack down onto the driveway, exploding a landscape light on impact. Lucinda screamed. Dayon flinched. The reality was setting and the CEO title carried a price he had never once budgeted for. He was the captain of a ship going under, and the water was at his chin. I switched off the camera feed. I had seen what I needed to see. It was time to go to work. I walked out to the garage. I did not touch the luxury sedan. I moved past it to the back corner, where my old 1998 Ford pickup sat beneath a tarp. It was dented. It smelled of diesel and old coffee. It was a truck I drove when I poured the first foundation of this company. I pulled the tarp away. I tossed 2 heavy black duffel bags across to the passenger seat. I had pulled the cash the day before from my personal private savings money I had made long before Grayfield Holdings ever existed. I drove out to Site 4. It was our biggest active project, a 20-story residential tower that stood at that moment as nothing but a skeleton of steel and raw concrete. When I rolled up, the quiet was unsettling. The cranes were motionless. The mixers sat cold and still. 200 men were scattered across the ground, on lumber stacks, on buckets, on bare earth. Heads were down. The whole site was wrapped in a heavy, defeated silence. They heard my truck before they spotted it. That old diesel had a rattle you couldn't miss. Heads came up fast. Luther, my foreman, rose from a pile of rebar and squinted through the dust in my direction. I drove the truck right into the heart of the site, throwing up a cloud of red Texas clay. I dropped it into park and cut the engine. The slam of the door rang out against the concrete pillars. I came around to the passenger side, grabbed the duffel bags, and heaved them onto the tailgate. The heavy thud pulled every set of eyes toward me. I climbed up and stood on that tailgate, back straight. I had on my work boots and a simple chambray shirt soaked in sweat. I looked out at them. I looked at Big Broderick, who had 3 daughters in college. I looked at Ernesto, whose wife was in the middle of chemotherapy. I looked at young Petty, who was putting money aside for an engagement ring. They looked back at me. They didn't see some retired old man up on that truck. They saw the man who had given them their jobs. Dion Grayfield says there's a glitch, I called out. My voice carried across the entire site without a megaphone. Dion Grayfield says the bank is running slow. Dion Grayfield says you've got to wait. I let that sit for a moment. I watched the anger flare in their eyes at the sound of my son's name. But I am not Dion Grayfield, I went on. I don't hide behind mansion walls. I don't settle up with emails. I pay with paper. I unzipped the first duffel bag. I reached in and came out with a fistful of envelopes. Each one was thick. Each one had a name written on the front. I started reading them off. Luther Okafor. Luther stepped forward. He looked at me, then at the envelope. He took it. He tore it open. Cash. Full wages plus a bonus for everything they'd been put through. Thank you, Mr. Grayfield, Luther said. His voice broke on the last word. I didn't slow down. Broderick Quarles, Ernesto Cifuentes, Garrett Nwosu. One after another they came forward. It felt like a communion. My hands were marked with ink from the bills and grit from the site. I held eye contact with every man. I shook every hand. I felt the calluses. I felt the weight of their gratitude. This was a currency Lucinda would never be able to comprehend. Loyalty cannot be purchased outright. You build it the same way you build anything, 1 brick at a time, $1 at a time. By the time both bags were empty, the atmosphere on that site had turned completely. The defeat was gone. In its place was something fierce, something protective. I stepped back up onto the tailgate one final time. The company accounts are frozen, I announced. And they are going to stay frozen. Grayfield Holdings is finished. The name is dead. A murmur rolled through the crowd. I raised my voice above it. I am starting a new job on Monday. It's a private project. My project. I need a crew. I need men who know how to work. I don't have an HR department. I don't have a marketing team. But I have money and I have work. I scanned their faces. Who's with me? It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation. Luther didn't pause for even a second. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his Grayfield Holdings ID badge. He looked at it, then dropped it in the dirt. I'm with Clifton, he said. Then Broderick threw his badge down. Then Ernesto. And then it became a downpour of plastic. 200 badges hitting the ground, clattering and skidding across the concrete. That sound was a corporation dying. That sound was a revolution being born. They didn't simply quit. They defected. They walked away from the benefits packages and the 401k promises Dayon had dangled in front of them. They chose the man standing on the tailgate of a rusted-out truck. I climbed back into the driver's seat. I watched them gathering their tools. They were smiling. They were already on their phones telling their wives the rent was covered. I picked up my own phone. One message to send. I took a photo of the pile of discarded badges lying there in the red dirt. I sent it to Dayon. Then I typed 4 words beneath it. "You have no army." I turned the key and drove away. I left every last piece of that plastic right there in the dust. It was garbage, same as the hollow promises my son had been making. He was still holding the title of CEO of Grayfield Holdings. But Grayfield Holdings was now just ink on a page. He had the title. I had the talent. And stripped of the talent, he was nothing more than a man standing alone in an empty room waiting on a phone that was never going to ring. The migration had begun, and he was the one left standing in the cold. The process server appeared at my front gate on a Tuesday morning. He was young, with a nervous sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He knew who I was. In Houston, everyone knew who Clifton Grayfield was. He also understood that he was about to deliver legal papers to a man who bought concrete by the ton and didn't rattle easily. He fed the thick manila envelope through the gate bars and retreated to his car like a man who had just tapped a sleeping bear on the shoulder. I walked down the driveway and picked it up. It was heavy, dense as a brick. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained, but I opened it anyway. I sat down on the porch and read through the legal complaint filed against me by my own son. Dayon Grayfield versus Clifton Grayfield. The charges were imaginative: breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, corporate sabotage, tortious interference with business relations. My son was taking me to court for blocking him from stealing my own company. He was suing me for defending the assets I had spent 40 years building. But the true objective of the lawsuit was buried on page 15. It was a motion for an emergency injunction to release the holdings of the Grayfield Family Trust. Dayon was desperate. He had no salary coming in, no credit line to draw on. His wife was burning through money she didn't have on attorney's billing at $500 an hour. He needed cash, and he needed it immediately. He believed the trust fund was his personal account to draw from. He treated it as an irrevocable birthright. He figured that carrying my last name meant carrying access to my wallet. He was wrong. I called Ezra Fendall. I told him to schedule a deposition. I told him to bring Dayon and his attack dog attorney into the conference room. I told him to pull the original trust documents from the safe deposit box, the ones with the yellowed paper and the wet ink signatures from 1994. The meeting happened 2 days later. Ezra's conference room was cold. The air conditioning was dialed to 65 degrees. It was a tactic Ezra used to throw people off balance. It worked. Dayon walked in wearing a suit that was sitting a size too large on him now. The past week had carved weight off his frame. He looked hollowed out. Dark circles were carved under both eyes. Lucinda was beside him. She came in sharp-eyed and furious. She was the engine driving all of this. I could read it in the way she leaned over and murmured into his ear. She was the architect of this lawsuit. She was the one who pushed him to take his father to court. They occupied one side of the walnut table. I sat across from them alone. Ezra stood at the head of the table. "Let's dispense with formalities," said Dayon's attorney. His name was Halford. He had built his reputation on being a pit bull. "My client is suffering genuine hardship as a direct result of Mr. Grayfield's vindictive conduct. We are demanding the immediate release of the family trust distributions. Dayon is the sole beneficiary. That money belongs to him. You have no legal basis to withhold it." I settled back in my chair. I laced my fingers together across my stomach. I looked directly at Dayon. "Is that what you believe?" I asked him. "That it's your money." "It is my money," Dayon shot back. "Mom established that trust for me. It's for my future. You're just holding it hostage because you're bitter that the board pushed you out." I looked at him with something close to pity. He genuinely didn't know. He had never once sat down and read the underlying documents. He had only ever cashed the checks. Ezra cleared his throat. He set a thick leather-bound binder on the table with a weight that landed like a gavel on a block. "Mr. Halford." Ezra said, his voice measured and unhurried. "While it's accurate that Dayon is the named beneficiary of the Grayfield Family Trust, you appear to have overlooked the conditions governing distribution, specifically Article 9. Halford's brow furrowed. He was scrolling through his digital files. "There's no Article 9 in what I have." "That's because you're looking at the summary document submitted to the bank," Ezra said. This is the original deed of trust. It controls all sub-accounts and held assets. Ezra opened the binder. He turned the pages with a deliberate, unhurried slowness. He found the page he was looking for. He pressed it flat with his palm. Article 9. Ezra read the moral clause aloud. Lucinda shifted in her seat. "What is this?" she hissed. Ezra kept reading without looking up. The grantor Clifton Grayfield reserves the right to revoke, suspend, or permanently cancel all beneficiary rights if the beneficiary engages in conduct that brings public shame, dishonor, or disrepute to the Grayfield family name. Furthermore, any act of legal aggression, physical intimidation, or public defamation directed at the grantor shall be deemed an act of forfeiture. The room went dead quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Halford stared at the page. He read it again. The color left his face. This is archaic," he stammered. "It won't survive a court challenge. You can't legally define dishonor. It's entirely subjective." Ezra smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Actually," Ezra said, "it's quite concrete." He picked up the remote and aimed it at the wall screen. The video of Lucinda began playing the TikTok livestream where she called me senile, accused me of abuse, and dragged the Grayfield name through the mud for likes and views. Ezra paused the footage. Then he pulled up the security video from the lobby. Dayon screaming at Vernon, Dion driving his foot into the glass door. Ezra clicked off the screen. "Public defamation," Ezra said. "Legal aggression. You filed a lawsuit against your father, Dayon. You put your name on a public document accusing him of sabotage. That is a matter of public record. You triggered the forfeiture clause the moment you signed that complaint." Dayon looked at me. His mouth hung open. But that means... "It means the trust is closed," I said. My voice was quiet. "It means the spigot has been shut off permanently." Dayon's fist came down on the table. "You cannot do that. That is millions of dollars. That is my entire life." "It was your life," I said, correcting him. "Now it is a fund for charitable purposes. The assets are being redirected to the United Negro College Fund and the Houston Trade School program." Lucinda was on her feet. She was trembling. "You're lying!" she screamed. "You're just trying to frighten us. We will fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to." "You're welcome to try," Ezra said. "But while you're doing that, there's something else you should understand about the assets held by this trust." Ezra turned another page. "You see, Dayon," Ezra said, "you made a structural error when you arranged your finances. To avoid taxes, you didn't buy anything in your own name. You titled everything to the trust." Dayon's eyes went wide. The River Oaks house listed. Title held by Grayfield Trust, LLC. The Porsche Panamera. Title held by Grayfield Trust, LLC. The vacation property at South Padre Island. Title held by Grayfield Trust, LLC. Even the furniture inside your home was purchased with trust funds and cataloged on the asset registry. I watched the understanding hit Dion like a physical blow. He stopped breathing for a beat. "Since you are no longer the beneficiary," Ezra said, closing the binder, "you are presently unauthorized occupants of trust property. You are operating a vehicle you have no legal claim to. You are sleeping in a house that isn't yours." I rose from my chair. I crossed to the window and looked out over the city. "I am giving you 24 hours, I said. 24 hours for what?" Dayon whispered. His voice was fractured. "To vacate the property," I said. "I have already arranged to have the locks changed tomorrow at noon. Leave the car keys on the counter, leave the furniture where it stands, take only your clothing and your personal belongings. If you remove anything beyond that, I will have you charged with theft." "Dad, please." Dion was on his feet reaching for me. "Dad, you can't do this. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. Lucinda is pregnant. There's a baby coming." I turned and looked at him. I looked at the expensive suit. I looked at the hands that had never gripped a shovel. "You have an MBA, I said. "You have a resume. Go find a job." "But the baby," Dayon pleaded. "If there is a baby," I said, turning my gaze to Lucinda, "that child will be provided for. I will establish a separate trust, direct tuition payments, direct medical payments. But not a single dollar flows to you, and not a single dollar flows to her." Lucinda looked at me with undisguised hatred. She grabbed her purse. "Come on, Dayon," she said. "Let's go. We don't need him. We'll find our own way." Dayon didn't move. He sat staring at the table, staring at the binder that held the ruins of his fortune. The truth was settling into him. He was not a wealthy man. He was a pauper in a rented suit. "Give me your wallet," I said. "What?" Dayon looked up. "Your wallet," I repeated. "The platinum card, the gas card, they're all linked to the trust. Hand them over." Dayon reached into his jacket. His hands were shaking badly enough that he dropped the wallet entirely. He picked it up. He pulled out the cards one by one, the symbols of his, standing the keys to his entire kingdom. He laid them on the walnut table. They made a small, hollow clicking sound. I gathered them up. I took a pair of scissors from Ezra's desk. I cut them in half. Snip, snip, snip. Each cut was final. "Now you are free," I said. "You wanted to be your own man. You wanted to build your own legacy. Go build it. Start from zero the same way I did." Dayon looked at the severed plastic. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. Real tears this time, not the ones he manufactured for cameras. These were the tears of a man staring down into the abyss. He turned and walked out of the room. His shoulders carried the slump of a man who had just lost everything. Lucinda followed behind him, her heels striking the floor in sharp, angry beats. I stood in the quiet of that office. I felt old. I felt worn through, but I felt clean. I had cut out the rot. It hurt. It hurt the way only necessary things can hurt. Ezra looked at me. He didn't offer me a drink. He understood there was nothing here to toast. "He's going to hate you for the rest of his life," Ezra said. "I know," I said, "but at least he'll have a life to live. If I'd left that money in his hands, he would have burned himself down to the ground. Now he has to learn to survive." I walked to the table and gathered the card fragments. I dropped them into the trash. I checked my watch. It was noon. I had a meeting with my new crew. We had a foundation to pour. Life pressed forward. Concrete doesn't pause for grief, and neither did I. The boy had 24 hours to start becoming a man. The clock was already moving. 3 days of silence followed after I cut those cards in half. 3 days of calm inside my house, but the kind of calm that rolls in just before a storm pivots and finds you. I spent my mornings in the garden tending to the azaleas my wife had put in the ground 20 years ago. My afternoons went to reviewing blueprints for the new community center I was funding with money that used to bankroll Dion's lifestyle. I was waiting. Desperation is a powerful fuel, and my son was running on fumes. On the 4th morning, the doorbell rang. What you are about to hear is the moment I had to sit across a table from people who believed they had already won. Before I take you there, let me ask you something. If someone close to you had been quietly working against you the whole time, would you rather confront them directly or let the truth surface on its own? It wasn't the tentative ring of someone uncertain about their welcome. It was the insistent hammering demand of someone who believed they had a right to be let in. I opened the door. Dayon and Lucinda stood on the porch. The shift in how they looked stopped me cold. The designer clothes had been traded for rumpled casual wear. Dayon looked wrung out. His eyes were red at the rims, and he hadn't touched a razor in days. Lucinda, though, was different. She didn't look beaten. She looked dangerous. There was a strange charge to her, a frantic wired energy that raised the hair on the back of my neck. She was clutching a large manila envelope to her chest, like armor. "We need to talk, Clifton," Lucinda said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. I let them inside. We moved to the kitchen. I did not offer coffee. I stationed myself by the sink, leaned back against the granite counter, and crossed my arms. "What is it you want?" I asked. "The eviction notice stands. You have 48 hours left to clear out of the River Oaks house." Dayon sank onto a bar stool. He buried his face in both hands. "Dad, please. We're going under. The electricity gets cut tomorrow. They came for the car this morning. We took an Uber to get here. We have absolutely nothing." "That is the path you chose," I said without raising my voice. "You chose to bite the hand that fed you. Now you need to figure out how to feed yourself." Lucinda stepped forward. She brought the envelope down hard on the granite counter. The slap of it rang through the kitchen. "We didn't come here to beg," Lucinda said. Her eyes were cold, still blue. "We came to give you an opportunity to make this right, to save your soul before you die alone and bitter." I looked at the envelope. I didn't reach for it. "What is in there?" I asked. Lucinda opened it. She withdrew a glossy black and white image, grainy, slightly blurred, but impossible to misread. It was an ultrasound scan. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words settled into the room and stayed there. Dayon lifted his head. His face held a tangled mix of hope and terror. He watched me searching for what I would do with the information. Lucinda slid the photo toward me. 8 weeks, she said. That is your grandchild Clifton. That is the future of the Grayfield line. That is the baby you were trying to starve. I looked at the photo. I saw the tiny gray smear that stood for a heartbeat. For one unguarded second, something pulled in my chest, a deep primal drive to protect, to see my name carried forward. Lucinda caught the flicker of hesitation in my face. Her mouth curved, a small, triumphant smile. "You can't do this to an innocent child," she said, her tone going soft, almost sweet. "Hate me all you want. Punish Dion if you must, but this is a life that did nothing wrong. Do you want your grandchild born in a shelter? Do you want the world to know that the great Clifton Grayfield left his own bloodline to suffer while he sat in a mansion counting his money?" Dion got to his feet. He moved beside Lucinda and put his arm around her. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "This changes everything, doesn't it? We have to put the family first now." I looked at them both. They stood together in the morning light, the expectant parents the victims of a hard-hearted old man. It was a clean, practiced picture, but I am a man who builds things, and building demands precision. It demands an understanding of measurements of time, of how things actually fit together. I looked back down at the ultrasound photograph. I picked it up. I put on my reading glasses. I studied the data printed in the corner. Gestational age 8 weeks and 2 days. Estimated due date January 15th. I ran the arithmetic in my head. It was not complicated. 8 weeks back from today put conception squarely in the middle of March. My mind traveled back to March without effort. I remembered that month clearly, because it was when Dayon had persuaded the board to send him to Europe. He said he needed to scout locations for international expansion. He said he had supplier meetings lined up in Germany and France. He left on March 1st. He returned on April 30th. 8 full weeks away. I looked at Dayon. I could picture his video calls from Berlin, him grumbling about the time difference, the time stamps on his emails sitting in my inbox. He was 4,000 miles away during the window of conception. I looked at Lucinda. I recalled exactly where she had been in March. She had remained in Houston. She said she had no interest in traveling. She said she wanted the time to concentrate on her charity work. I remembered the credit card charges from those weeks. Dinners at expensive steakhouses, late-night Uber rides, hotel charges at the Post Oak Hotel downtown. The arithmetic didn't hold. The geography didn't hold. I set the photo down. I removed my glasses. I looked at Lucinda. She was still wearing that smile, the smile of someone who believed they had already won. She thought she had found the one card I couldn't play around. She thought biology was a trump card no one would think to audit. Congratulations, I said. My voice carried nothing in it. Dayon exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for an hour. "Thank you, Dad. Thank God. I knew you'd come through." "So," Lucinda said, extending her hand, "we need the accounts unfrozen today. We need to book the best obstetrician. We need to get started on the nursery. The stress is harmful to the baby, Clifton. You need to fix this now." I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "A child should not be made to pay for what its parents have done. If that is in fact a Grayfield baby, then that baby deserves everything." "What do you mean, if?" Lucinda snapped. Her smile slipped. I walked to the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. I put my finger on the month of March. "Dayon?" I said, "Do you remember March?" "Yeah," Dayon said, confusion crossing his face. "I was in Europe the Germany trip." "You were away for 8 weeks," I said. "You left on the 1st. You came back on the 30th. Dayon nodded. "Right, so what?" I tapped the ultrasound photograph. "That baby is 8 weeks old. That means conception happened right in the middle of your trip. Unless you chartered a jet home that I never paid for, you were 4,000 miles away when your wife became pregnant." The room dropped into absolute silence. The only thing I could hear was the refrigerator hum. Dayon looked at the calendar. Then he turned and looked at Lucinda. His brow drew together. He was working through it, trying to force the pieces into a shape that made sense, but they weren't from the same picture. Lucinda's face drained, the flush left in an instant, and she went the color of chalk. "That's just an estimate," she said, the steadiness gone from her voice. "Doctors are always off on dates. It could be 7 weeks. It could be 9. You don't know what you're talking about." "Perhaps," I said. "Biology is complicated, but numbers are simple." I walked back to the counter. I looked Lucinda straight in the eye. Here is what I am prepared to do, I said. I will open a new trust fund today. I will deposit $1 million into it immediately. It covers all medical expenses, all housing, all education. I will purchase you a home. I will reinstate Dayan's salary. Dayan's eyes lit up. Dad, really? I raised one finger. One condition. Anything, Dayan said quickly. Whatever it is, just name it. We are going to the clinic right now, I said. Not tomorrow, now. We are going to do a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. A simple blood draw from the mother. It is safe for the baby. It is 99% accurate. We will have results in 48 hours. I picked up my car keys from the counter. If the DNA is a match for Dayan, I give you back everything. I will apologize to both of you. I will step back and let Dayan run the whole operation. I looked at Lucinda. But if the DNA does not match, then you receive nothing. Not one dime, and you walk out of my son's life for good. Dayan looked at Lucinda. His face was open, hopeful. Honey, this is good news, he said. It's just a blood draw. Let's go do it right now. We clear this up, and we fix everything today. Lucinda did not move. She stood and looked at me with a hatred so concentrated, it radiated off her like heat. She knew. She knew that I knew, and she understood that a lab result would finish the last lie she had left. No, she said just above a whisper. What? Dayan asked. No. Lucinda's voice broke into a shout. She backed away from the counter. I am not letting you stick needles in me. I am not letting you put my baby at risk because of your paranoia. This is an insult. How dare you question my fidelity? I am his wife. Lucinda, it's just a blood draw, Dayan said, his voice shaking. It's safe. Dad said $1 million. Why won't you do it? Because he is trying to trap us, she cried out. She was unraveling now, her eyes sweeping the room like a cornered animal's. He will manipulate the results. He has everyone on his payroll. He pays people to lie. I don't trust him. I have no control over the lab, Lucinda, I said, keeping my voice level. And I have no control over the truth. Lucinda's fingers closed around Dayan's arm, her nails pressing into his skin. We are leaving Dayan. Now he's lost his mind. He wants to harm our baby. Let's go. She yanked Dayan toward the door. Dayan didn't move. He dug his heels in. He looked at his wife. Then he looked at the calendar. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in his life, I watched something actually working behind his eyes. The blind, unquestioning loyalty was starting to fracture. Doubt was seeping in the way water finds its way into a foundation crack. Lucinda, Dayan said quietly. If it's my baby, why won't you take the test? Lucinda slapped him. It was a sharp, vicious crack of sound. Don't you start, she hissed. Don't you dare take his side. If you love me, you'll walk out that door this minute. If you stay here asking questions, we are finished. She turned and bolted out of the kitchen. She ran down the hallway and out the front door. Dayan stood where he was. His cheek was red. He stared at the empty doorway. Then he looked at the ultrasound photo sitting on the counter. He picked it up. He fixed his eyes on the date. March. He looked at me. His eyes were full of tears. But these weren't a child's tears. They were the tears of a man who has just taken a blade to the heart. She lied, he whispered. I crossed the kitchen and put a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. I don't know for certain, son, I said, but a woman who is telling the truth doesn't run from a blood test. Dayan buckled. He slid down the cabinet face until he was sitting on the kitchen floor. He dropped his head into his hands and he broke. He wept for the baby that wasn't his. He wept for a marriage that had been a performance from the start. He wept for every year he had spent trying to be enough for a woman who had only ever seen him as a line of credit. I stood over him. I did not reach for soft words. I let the pain do its work. Pain teaches. Pain is the fire that burns the weakness out of a man. I went to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water. I held it out to him. Drink, I said. You've got a long road in front of you. Dayan looked up. What do I do to you? You stop crying, I said, and you start counting. You count every day she lied to you. You count every dollar she took from you. And then you decide, are you going to be a victim or are you going to be a gray field? He took the water. He drank. He dragged his sleeve across his face. The look in his eyes was different now. The softness had gone out of them. Something harder had moved in to take its place. Something colder. I want the test, he said. She won't agree to it, I said. Then I'll wait until the baby is born. Dayon said. And if it isn't mine, I will burn her entire world down. I nodded. Good answer. The pregnancy card had been played, and it had failed. Lucinda had overreached. She believed a baby would lock everything in place, bind Dayon to her permanently. Instead, she had handed him the one tool he needed to cut himself free. The war was moving into its final stage, and my son was finally willing to fight. The quiet inside the River Oaks mansion was gone. It had been swallowed up by the ugly, muffled sounds of a marriage coming apart in the dark. I knew precisely what was unfolding inside those walls, because I understood that utility schedule the way I understand my own pulse. At 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the power grid command pushed a remote signal to the smart meter mounted on the side of the house. Click. The central air conditioning fell silent. The refrigerator stopped its low hum. The chandelier blinked and went dark. Living in Houston without power in May is not merely uncomfortable. It is a sentence. Heat soaks into the drywall. Humidity shoulders its way in under the door frames. The house turns into a kiln. I pictured Dayon on the expensive Italian sofa sitting in the dark. His phone battery was probably close to dead. The water had been shut off 2 hours earlier. He couldn't shower. He couldn't flush a toilet. He couldn't wash the sweat from his skin. He was sitting inside a $2 million tomb. Lucinda was not sitting. Lucinda was screaming. Her voice would be bouncing off those high ceilings. It wasn't the heat she was screaming about. It was the injustice of it all. She was screaming at Dayon. "You are useless," she yelled. Her voice was shrill, slicing through the dead air. "You told me you were the CEO. You told me you had control of the money. Look at where we are. We are living like animals. My parents are coming to visit next week, Dayon. What exactly am I supposed to tell them? That my husband is a failure who can't keep the lights on?" Dayon tried to reason with her. I could hear his voice in my head, worn down, defeated. "Lucinda, please. It's only temporary. My father is making a point. We just have to ride it out." "Ride it out," she laughed back. A cruel, mocking sound. "I didn't marry you to ride out poverty, Dayon. I married you because you were a gray field. I married you because I thought you were a man, but you were just a boy living in your father's shadow. Do something. Fix this, or I swear I will find someone who can." The argument kept climbing. It stopped being about money. It became about resentment, about every small slight and every quietly buried disappointment boiling up in the heat. Dayon accused her of being a gold digger. She accused him of being weak. They hurled words at each other like grenades engineered for maximum damage. Eventually, the screaming ran out of steam, not because anything was resolved, but because they were both exhausted. Dayon retreated to the guest bedroom, looking for somewhere quiet to sleep. He thought the night's battle was over. He had no idea that Lucinda wasn't sleeping. She was working. Lucinda sat in the kitchen, lit by nothing but her phone's flashlight. She was sweating. Her expensive silk blouse was plastered to her back. She stared at the dark refrigerator. She stared at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Then she made a decision. She was finished with Dayon. He was a vessel taking on water, and Lucinda was not the kind of person who goes down with the ship. She was the kind who grabs the only lifeboat and rows away watching you sink. She waited until Dayon's heavy breathing drifted in from the hallway. Then she crept into the home office. She opened Dayon's laptop. 12% battery remaining. That was plenty. She knew the password. It was her birthday. Of course it was. Dayon was sentimental that way. Lucinda was strategic. She logged in. She didn't glance at the family photos. She didn't open a single personal email. She went straight for the folder marked confidential. She was after the crown jewel of the construction industry, the client list. This was not simply a roster of names. It was a full database holding the personal contact information of the most powerful developers in the Southeast. Bid histories, profit margins, private cell numbers belonging to city planners and zoning commissioners. It was 40 years of my handshakes and my word made digital. In the wrong hands, it was worth millions. Lucinda pulled a USB drive from her purse. Her hand trembled slightly as she plugged it in, not from guilt, but from adrenaline. She dragged the folder onto the drive. The progress bar crept across the screen, copying 2,500 files. She watched the blue bar fill from left to right. She smiled. This was her exit. She would sell the list to Preston Coyle. Preston was my fiercest rival, a man with no principles and plenty of money. He had spent a decade trying to crack into my network. Lucinda knew he would pay cash for what she was holding enough cash to set her up in a penthouse in Miami and hire a divorce attorney who could reduce Dion to rubble. The copy finished. She pulled the drive free. She closed the laptop. She walked out of the house into the thick, humid night. She got into her car, which she'd stashed down the block to keep it away from the repo man. She drove in the direction of Preston Coyle's office. She thought she was driving toward freedom. She had no idea she was driving straight into a minefield. I was awake when the alert fired on my secure server. Access alert. Unauthorized copy. Terminal YD Dayon home office. I sat up in bed. I adjusted my pillows. I did not call the police. I did not call Dayon. I poured myself a glass of water, and I waited. I had been waiting on this exact moment for 6 months. I know human nature, and I know Lucinda. I understood that once the pressure climbed high enough, she would make a move on the family's confidential files. It was only a matter of time, which is why 6 months earlier, I had directed my IT director to build a honeypot. We constructed a duplicate folder on Dion's laptop. It was identical in appearance to the real database, same file, names, same sizes. But the data inside was poison. The phone numbers routed straight to a sex hotline out of Las Vegas. The email addresses bounced back to nothing. The bid histories had been inflated by 300%, and the private notes on the clients were loaded with insulting remarks that would get anyone sued for libel the moment they tried to put them to use. Lucinda never checked the files. She didn't know the construction business well enough to read what she was actually looking at. She saw file names and she saw dollar signs. She met Preston Coyle in a diner parking lot at 2 o'clock in the morning. I had a private investigator 3 rows back shooting photographs through a long lens. Lucinda passed over the USB drive. Preston handed her a thick envelope. It was an advance $10,000 in cash. He promised another $50,000 once he'd confirmed the data. Lucinda took the money. She counted it with greedy fingers. She laughed. She probably cracked a joke at my expense. Probably said the old man never knew what hit him. Preston drove back to his office. He was eager. He wanted to steal my upcoming bid for the new stadium project. He plugged the drive into his mainframe. He opened the files. He launched his data mining program. That was when the trap snapped shut. The files weren't simply garbage. They were tagged with a digital tracker. The instant Preston opened them on his corporate network, the tracker pinged my lawyer's server. It logged his IP address. It logged the time. It logged the fact that he was sitting in possession of stolen digital property. But the immediate payoff was even sweeter. Preston tried to dial the first number on the VIP list. He thought he was calling the mayor of Houston. Instead, he got a recorded line playing circus music and asking for a credit card number for adult entertainment. He tried the second number, a disconnection tone. He pulled up the bid data. It showed we'd purchased concrete at $500 a yard, a price so absurdly inflated that any contractor who plugged it into an estimate would come out looking like a fool. Preston understood in that moment that he'd been played. He had paid cash money for a bag of digital trash handed over by a desperate housewife. His face must have gone a magnificent shade of purple. He picked up his phone. He didn't call me. He called Lucinda. Lucinda was in a motel room counting her cash all over again. She saw Preston's name on the screen. She picked up expecting praise, expecting the rest of her money. "You stupid woman," Preston screamed. His voice was so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. "You sold me garbage. This data is fake. It's a joke." "What?" Lucinda stammered. "No, that's impossible. I pulled it right off Dion's laptop. It's the master list." "It's a decoy, you idiot," Preston roared. "The numbers connect to phone sex lines. The prices are all wrong. And worst of all, you planted a tracker on my network. Clifton knows. He knows I have the drive." Lucinda felt the room tilt beneath her. "No," she whispered. "No, he can't know." "He knows," Preston yelled. "And I am not going down for corporate espionage because of you. I'm filing a police report right now. I'm telling them you came to me and tried to defraud me with fabricated information. I'm handing the drive over to the authorities. You'd better get yourself a lawyer, and you'd better return my $10,000, or I will send someone to collect it from your skin." The line went dead. Lucinda sat on the cheap motel bed. The cash piled in her lap suddenly felt heavy and dirty. She stared at the phone. She understood that she hadn't simply betrayed her husband. She had walked straight into a cage I had built for her before she even knew she was in the game. Back at my house, a text came in from Ezra Fendall. Tracker active. Coil's IP address confirmed. We have proof of theft and proof of attempted sale. Do you want to press charges? I looked at the message. I thought about Lucinda alone in that motel room. I thought about Dayon sleeping in the warmth of that dark mansion, completely unaware that his wife had just tried to sell his inheritance for pocket change. I typed my reply. Not yet. Let them sweat. Let Preston scare her. Let her run. When she figures out she has nowhere to go, she'll come back to the house. She'll try to lie her way out of it. And that is when we play the recording. I set the phone down. I turned off the lamp. I slept soundly that night. The implosion had unfolded exactly as I had planned. The foundation of their marriage was built on my money. I pulled the money out and the whole structure caved in. Lucinda was a criminal. Dayon was a cuckold. And I was just a plain builder who understood that if you give a thief enough rope, they will eventually hang themselves. The sun would be up in a few hours, and with it would come the final reckoning. The eviction notice was taped to the front door of the River Oaks mansion at 9 in the morning. It was a bright orange sticker that sat on the wood like an open wound. 2 sheriff's deputies stood at the entrance with their arms crossed. These weren't the private security guards Dion used to throw his weight around. These were officers of the law, and they carried a court order signed by a judge who had reviewed the evidence of the trust violation. I wasn't there to witness it, but my property manager gave me the full account. He said Dion tried to argue, tried to tell the deputies it was his house, tried to tell them there had been a misunderstanding with the bank, but the deputies had no interest in his explanations. They cared about the paperwork, and the paperwork said Dion Grayfield was a squatter in a property belonging to the Grayfield Family Trust. They gave him 30 minutes to pack, 30 minutes to compress a life of luxury into 3 suitcases. Dayon ran up the stairs. He grabbed his designer suits. He grabbed his watches. He grabbed the things he believed defined him. Lucinda didn't grab clothes. She grabbed her jewelry box. She grabbed the small safe from the closet. She grabbed the things she could sell. They met on the front lawn. The neighbors watched from behind their curtains. The landscapers across the street shut off their mowers to stare. It was the public humiliation I had warned him about. It was the moment the bubble finally burst. Lucinda looked at the pile of luggage sitting on the grass. Then she looked at the black Porsche Cayenne parked in the driveway. "We can sleep in the car tonight," Lucinda said. "We can get a hotel tomorrow when I sell the diamond necklace." Dayon shook his head. "The cars tracked Lucinda. The repo man will be here any minute. We can't take the car." Lucinda went still. She stared at the black machine that had been her chariot. Then she looked at Dayon. She studied his sweating face. She studied his shaking hands. She looked at the orange sticker on the door, and for the first time she saw him clearly. Not a CEO, not a future, a liability. A black sedan eased up to the curb. A Lincoln Town car. The window came down. The man in the back seat wore a sharp gray suit. It was Aldwin, the lawyer who had represented the rival firm. The man Lucinda had been talking to while Dayon was asleep. Lucinda picked up her jewelry box. She picked up her Louis Vuitton bag. She did not pick up Dayon's hand. "Where are you going?" Dayon asked. His voice was small. "I'm going to survive," Lucinda said. She walked toward the black car. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't apologize. "Lucinda, wait!" Dayon screamed. "You can't leave me. We are married. We are in this together." Lucinda stopped at the car door. She turned around. The expression on her face wasn't anger. It was indifference. The look you give a stranger who has stepped on your shoe. "You're broke, Dion," she said, "and broke is not a good look on me." She got in the car. The door slammed shut. The Lincoln pulled away and vanished down the tree-lined street. Dayon stood alone on the curb. The deputies were locking the gate. He had 3 suitcases. He had $12 in his pocket. He had no wife, no home, no father. He dragged his suitcases along the sidewalk. He walked 3 miles until his blisters broke open. He sat down on a bus stop bench as the sun sank below the horizon. The sky turned a bruised purple. The streetlights blinked on. The reality of where he stood settled over him like a soaked and heavy blanket. He was 32 years old, and for the first time in his life, he was completely and utterly alone. The night turned cold. Unseasonably cold for Houston in May. A storm front rolled through, pushing a driving rain that soaked straight through Dion's thin cotton shirt. He found cover under the awning of a shuttered gas station. He drew his knees up to his chest. He shivered his stomach, knotting with cramps. He hadn't eaten since breakfast the morning before. He thought about all the food he used to throw away. He thought about the steaks he ordered and left half-finished. He thought about the sushi platters he discarded because they weren't fresh enough. The hunger was a sharp physical thing that twisted in his gut. He watched cars roll past, people heading home to warm houses, people going out to dinner. They didn't see him. He was just another shadow swallowed by the city. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The battery sat at 4%. The screen was spiderwebbed from where he'd dropped it on the sidewalk. He opened the contact list. He scrolled past his fraternity brothers. They wouldn't pick up. He owed them money. He scrolled past his business partners. They despised him. He scrolled past Lucinda's number. That wound was still too raw to press. His thumb stopped over one name, Dad. He looked at the call history. 55 missed calls. 55 times he had rung me in a panic, demanding money, demanding answers, demanding his way. 55 times I had let it ring out. He hesitated. Pride is a stubborn tenant. It had outlasted the eviction. It had outlasted the breakup. But it could not hold out against the hunger. It could not stand up against cold rain driving sideways into his face. He needed someone to pull him out, and he knew full well he hadn't earned that. He pressed the call button. My phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was awake. I was in my study with a book open on my lap, but the pages hadn't turned in an hour. I knew this call was on its way. I had been waiting for it. The timing had to be precise. Answer too soon, and he would think there was room to negotiate. Wait too long, and I might break him past the point of repair. I looked at the screen. The 56th call. I picked it up. Hello? My voice was steady, not angry, not warm. It was the voice of a mountain. Dad. Dayan's voice came out as a whisper. It was trembling. I could hear the rain behind him. I could hear tires hissing over wet asphalt. Dad, I'm cold. I said nothing. I let the silence open up. I let him sit inside his own vulnerability. I have nowhere to go. Dayan sobbed. Lucinda left me. They took the house. I'm at the gas station on Westheimer. I'm hungry. Dad, please just send me $50. Just enough for a motel room and something to eat. I'll pay you back, I swear. I close my eyes. It would have been so easy. One button and his pain stops. But his pain stopping was not the same thing as his growth starting. If I rescued him tonight, he would never understand that choices carry weight. He would never learn that a man has to hold himself upright, even when the floor is falling out beneath him. No, I said. What? Dayan gasped. Dad, please. I'm begging you. I'm your son. You are my son, I said. And that is exactly why I won't give you money. Money is what put you here. Money is the poison that convinced you that you were above the people who built everything you stood on. If I hand you cash tonight, you are nothing but a beggar with a full stomach. Come morning, you'll be hungry again. Then what am I supposed to do? Dayan cried. You want me to die out here. I want you to live, I said, but I want you to live like a man. I rose from my chair and crossed to the window. Rain was lashing the glass. I have a job opening, I said. A job, Dayan asked. His voice was uncomprehending. You mean at the office? No, I said. The office is closed to you. I have a position at the new site, the high-rise on the Allen Parkway construction site. We are pouring the foundation. I need a laborer. A laborer, Dayan stammered. Dad, I have an MBA. I'm an executive. You are a homeless man with 4% battery life, I said. That is your reality right now. The job pays $15 an hour. It starts at 6 a.m. You'll wear boots. You'll wear a hard hat. You'll carry bags of cement. You'll shovel gravel. You'll do whatever Luther tells you to do, and you will not complain. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Dayan breathing. I could hear the battle being fought inside his skull, the battle between his ego and his will to survive. $15 an hour, he whispered. That won't even cover a taxi. Then walk, I said. It is 3 miles from where you're standing. If you leave now, you'll arrive by 5:30. That gives you 30 minutes to get some water and find a pair of gloves. Dad, this is cruel, Dayan said. No, son, I said. This is mercy. Lucinda left you because you had nothing real to offer. The world looked past you because you were broke. I am giving you the one thing that nobody can strip away from you. I am giving you the chance to earn your dinner. My battery's dying, Dayan said. The panic was climbing back into his voice. Then make your choice, I said. 6 a.m., Gate 4, ask for Luther. If you're 1 minute late, the job is gone. And if you don't show up, don't bother making it the 57th call. Because I won't answer. I hung up. I set the phone on the desk. My hand was trembling. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Leaving my son out in the rain felt like reaching into my own chest. But I knew the rain would wash him clean. I knew the hunger would sharpen what had gone soft in him. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. Sleep was not going to come tonight. I would wait. I would drive to the site at 5 a.m. and sit in my truck watching the gate. I had to know whether my son was built to survive the death of his own ego. I had to know if the boy I had raised could grow into the man I needed him to be. The night was dark and the rain refused to quit. But somewhere out there on the soaked streets of Houston, Dion Grayfield was taking the first real steps of his life. He was walking toward the bottom so he could finally find solid ground. The 56th call was over. The 57th step belonged to him. The sun hadn't broken the horizon when Dion walked through Gate 4. The sky was a bruised purple, and the air hung heavy with diesel exhaust and wet concrete. He had on a pair of work boots I'd picked up for him at a thrift store and a yellow safety vest that draped loosely over his frame. He didn't look like an executive. He looked like a ghost haunting a graveyard of steel. Luther was waiting by the mixer. Luther didn't smile. He didn't extend a hand. He pointed to a pallet of Portland cement bags. Each bag weighed 94 pounds. There were 50 bags stacked on that pallet. Move them, Luther said. The mixer needs feeding. Dion looked at the bags. He looked at his hands that had only ever wrapped around a fountain pen or a steering wheel. He bent down and grabbed the first bag. He grunted. The weight hit him like a verdict, dead weight coated in dust with no give whatsoever. He swung it up onto his shoulder. The rough paper scraped along the side of his neck. He staggered toward the mixer 10 yards away. By the 5th bag, sweat was soaking through his shirt. By the 10th, his breathing had collapsed into ragged, tearing gasps. By the 20th, the trouble began. Dion had no idea how to lift properly. He was pulling from his back instead of his legs. He was gripping the bags too tightly. The paper packaging was glazed in fine cement dust that worked like sandpaper. I watched from the foreman's trailer. I saw him sway. I saw him drop a bag, and a cloud of gray dust exploded into his face. He coughed until he retched. He dragged his sleeve across his face, smearing the dust together with sweat into a gray paste that burned his eyes. He looked down at his hands. The friction had done its damage. Enormous blisters had risen across his palms and fingers, white fluid-filled domes of pure agony. He tried to shift his grip. He grabbed the next bag. Pop! I saw him flinch. The skin across his palm had torn away. Raw pink flesh was open to the gritty dust. Blood started smearing across the cement bags, bright red against all that gray. He stopped. He stood there, chest heaving. He looked at the blood. He looked at the 30 bags still waiting on the pallet. His legs were shaking. His lower back had locked into spasms. He looked toward the trailer, hoping I would step out, hoping I would say that was enough, hoping I would give him a reason to stop. I did not step out. I took a sip of my coffee and watched. If he quit now, the lesson was lost. The pain was the teacher. The blood was the tuition. Dion understood that no help was coming. He let out a low growl and grabbed the bag with his bleeding hands. He screamed when the raw skin met the paper, but he lifted it. He hurled it into the mixer. He went back for another, then another. He was crying now. Tears carved clean tracks through the dust on his face, but he didn't stop. He moved every single bag until the pallet stood empty. At noon, the sight whistle cut through the air, sharp and piercing. 30 minutes for lunch. The silence that followed had weight to it. Engines died, hammering stopped. The crew gathered under the shade of the unfinished second-floor slab. These were men who had worked for Grayfield Holdings for years. The same men Dion had tried to fire. The same men whose pensions he had threatened. They settled onto overturned buckets and coolers, cracking open their lunchboxes. They ate thick sandwiches and drank iced tea. They laughed and traded stories with the easy comfort of men who trust each other with their lives. Dion had no cooler. He had no bucket. He dropped onto a stack of lumber in the full sun, too spent to drag himself into the shade. He held his hands in his lap. They were shaking without stop. They were caked in dried blood and concrete dust. He looked over at the crew, waiting for someone to wave him over, waiting for someone to offer him water. Nobody did. "Hey, CEO," a voice called out. It was Big Broderick. He was working his way through an apple. "You missed a spot over there. Pretty sure I saw a pebble you didn't sweep up." The crew broke into laughter, hard, merciless laughter. "Where's the Porsche Dayon?" another man asked. "You forget where you parked it, or did the bank repossess your driving skills too?" "Look at those hands," Broderick said, pointing with his knife. "Baby hands. Never done a real day's work in his life. Thinks he can stroll down here and play construction worker. He'll be gone by 2 o'clock. I'll put $50 on it. He walks off the site before the concrete truck even shows up." "I'll take that bet," Luther said. "I give him 10 minutes. Look at him. He's already broken." Dayon heard every word. Shame burned across his face. He looked at the gate. It was open. Just 50 yards away, he could push himself up. He could walk out. He could vanish into the city. The pain in his hands was blinding. The humiliation was suffocating. He hated them. He hated me. He hated all of it. He started pushing himself up off the lumber. He was going to quit. He was going to prove them right, because it felt easier to be a failure than to stand there and be a punching bag. He got to his feet. He swayed. He took one step toward the gate. Then he stopped. Something caught his eye. Across the site near the rebar station, a figure was working. A man in a white hard hat. The man was 68 years old. He was wearing a chambray shirt soaked in sweat, kneeling on the ground and tying steel rebar with a pair of pliers. It was me. I wasn't in the trailer. I wasn't sitting in the air conditioning. I was down in the dirt tying the steel that would hold the building up. I moved with a rhythm built across 4 decades of the same work. Twist cut, twist cut. My hands were scarred. My knees ached. But I didn't stop. Dayon watched me. He watched the owner of the company working harder than the youngest man on the crew. He saw the way the other workers carried themselves around me. They didn't mock me. They didn't laugh. They worked faster because I was working. He looked at the gate again. Then he looked at me. Something shifted in him at that moment. He understood that the gap between us wasn't money. It wasn't the MBA hanging on his wall. It was this. It was the willingness to bleed for what you built. He sat back down on the lumber. He turned his back to the gate. Luther walked over. He didn't look at Dayon. He just set a brown paper bag on the wood beside him. "Eat," Luther said. "You pass out on me, and I have to do paperwork. I hate paperwork." Luther walked away. Dayon opened the bag. Inside a sandwich, 2 slices of cheap white bread, a single slice of ham, no cheese, no mustard, and a lukewarm bottle of water. It was the saddest lunch he had ever laid eyes on. A week ago, he would have dropped it in the trash. A week ago, he was eating lobster bisque at the club. He lifted the sandwich with his bloody hands. Red smears soaked into the bread. He took a bite. The bread was dry. The meat was salty. It went down hard. But as he chewed, something strange moved through him. The food hit his empty stomach and spread warmth into his limbs. It wasn't just calories. It was fuel. It was the first meal he had paid for with his own sweat. He hadn't put it on my credit card. He hadn't traded on his name to get it. He bought it with the skin off his palms. He took another bite, then another. He drained the water in one long pull. He wiped his mouth. He looked at his hands again. They were ugly. They were wrecked, but they were his. The whistle blew again. Back to work. Broderick glanced over, fully expecting that spot on the lumber to be empty, expecting to collect his $50. But Dayon was on his feet. He pulled his gloves on over the bandages. He winced as he yanked them tight. He walked back to the mixer. I straightened up from the rebar. I caught his eye across the dusty lot. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I gave him one nod, short and sharp. Dayon nodded back. He picked up a shovel. He drove it into the gravel pile. He threw the load. He dug again. He was still slow, still weak, but he was there. The boy who drove a Porsche was dead, buried under the cement dust. The man clawing his way out of the rubble was someone I didn't yet recognize, but for the first time in 32 years, I found myself wanting to. The winter winds had passed and the thick, humid heat of a Houston summer had settled back in. It was July. Out at the Allen Parkway construction site, the skeleton of the building was now dressed in glass and steel. We were ahead of schedule. The rhythm of the work beat like a steady drum against the pulse of the city. Dayon was no longer the soft boy who'd buckled under the weight of a cement bag. He was lean now. Sun-darkened skin, hands that were calloused and scarred. He had been promoted to assistant foreman, not on account of his last name, but because he was the first one through the gate each morning and the last one to leave. He had a small apartment near the stadium. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He paid his own bills. He was building a life that was genuinely his. But the past has a way of finding you just when you think you've buried it for good. It happened during the lunch break. The crew was eating in the shade, talking football. I was going over safety reports in the trailer. Then the site gate rattled violently, and the sound tore right through everything else. Then came the screaming, a voice I hadn't heard in months, unmistakable, high-pitched, laced with frantic entitlement. I stepped out of the trailer and stood on the metal steps and looked down. Lucinda was storming across the gravel lot. She looked different. The designer wardrobe was gone, replaced by a dress that read, "Expensive from 20 feet away and cheap from 5. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes were wild, and cradled in her arms was a bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She was carrying a baby. She drove straight toward Dayon. The crew stopped eating. They went quiet. They knew the history. They knew the wreckage this woman had left behind. Dayon rose slowly. He wiped his hands on his jeans. He didn't move toward her. He didn't look relieved. He looked guarded. Lucinda pulled up 3 feet away. She thrust the baby forward like a weapon. "Look at him!" she screamed. Her voice broke. "Look at your son, Dayon. Look at what you're doing to us. We are living in a motel with roaches while you play construction worker and your father sits on millions." Dayon looked at the bundle. The baby was asleep, tiny and innocent, a fragile life caught between the wreckage of adult greed. "What are you doing here, Lucinda?" Dayon asked. His voice was steady. It was deeper than it used to be. "I am here for what is mine," she yelled. "I brought your heir into this world. I gave this family a legacy, and you abandoned us. You let your father cut us off. I am done waiting. I want my money. I want back pay for child support. I want a house, and I want it today, or I am going to the press. I will tell everyone that Clifton Grayfield lets his grandson starve." She spun to face me. She spotted me standing on the trailer steps. Her eyes went hard. "There he is!" she spat. "The great philanthropist. The man who builds libraries but turns his back on his own blood. Are you happy, Clifton? Are you satisfied, watching your grandson dressed in rags?" I came down the steps, boots grinding on the gravel, slow and steady. I didn't look at Lucinda. I looked at the baby. I caught Luther's eye. "Bring a chair," I said. Luther brought a folding chair. "Sit down, Lucinda," I said. "You are hysterical. You are going to drop the child." "I am not sitting down," she shrieked. "I want what I'm owed." "I'd sit down or leave," I said. Not loud, but it carried the weight of iron. She sat. She pressed the baby hard against her chest. Her whole body was shaking. "You think you won," she hissed at me. "You think you broke me? I have the ultimate proof right here in my arms. This is Dion's son. You cannot argue with biology. You have to pay. It is the law." Dayon looked at me. There was a question behind his eyes. He remembered that conversation in the kitchen months ago. He remembered the doubt I had planted. But now, staring at the tiny hands and the sleeping face, the pull of blood was strong. He wanted to believe. Every man wants to believe he is a father. "Is he mine?" Dayon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course he is yours, you idiot," Lucinda snapped. "Who else would it be? I was your wife. I was faithful. Your father put those doubts in your head because he is a bitter old man." I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a folded document. It was not a check. It was a laboratory report from Memorial Hermann Hospital. "You see, Lucinda," I said, stepping closer, "you made a mistake. When you gave birth last week at the county hospital, you listed Dion as the father on the birth certificate to secure insurance. That made it a public record. And since I am the one carrying the catastrophic insurance policy that covers Dion and his dependents, I have access to the medical files." Lucinda went pale. She clutched the baby tighter. The baby stirred and started to cry, a thin, reedy wail. "I authorized a paternity test," I said. "I had the sample taken the day he was born. Standard procedure for the insurance company when the parents are separated." "You had no right," she whispered. "I have every right to know where my money goes," I said. I opened the document. I smoothed it flat against the hood of a nearby truck. The crew gathered around, not to gossip, to witness. This was a verdict, and it was written in black and white. I read the results aloud. Subject: baby boy Grayfield. Alleged father: Dayon Grayfield. Probability of paternity: 0.0%. The silence across that site was absolute. Even the wind stopped moving. Dayon stared at the paper. He stared at me. He didn't blink, he didn't breathe, he didn't speak. I kept reading. However, the genetic markers returned a 99.9% match with a profile already in the system, a Mr. Rico Turbo Belvins. I looked at Lucinda. "Turbo," I said. "The personal trainer at the gym you went to every morning? The one you paid $3,000 to for private sessions while Dion was in Germany?" Lucinda looked as if she had taken a bullet. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. The lie she had staked her entire future on had just crumbled to dust. She looked down at the baby that was supposed to be her golden ticket, the baby that was supposed to hand her back the mansion. Now it was nothing but evidence of what she had done. "It's a mistake," she stammered. Her voice had gone thin. The lab swapped the samples. "There is no mistake, Lucinda," I said. Turbo confirmed it. "I spoke with him this morning. He admitted everything the moment I told him he could face liability for child support fraud if he stayed quiet. He is actually quite eager to be a father. He works at a car wash now. I imagine he will be glad to hear from you." Dayon took a step forward. He moved up to Lucinda and looked down at her. For a moment, I braced for an explosion. I expected him to overturn the chair. I expected the old Dion reactive, uncontrolled to surface. But the man standing there was not that Dayon. This was a man who had spent 3 months shoveling gravel. A man who had learned what patience costs. He looked at the crying baby. He reached out and touched the infant's cheek with one gentle finger. "He is beautiful," Dayon said. Lucinda looked up, and hope flickered in her eyes. "Dayon, please, we can work through this. We can lie. We can tell everyone he's yours. Your father doesn't have to know. Oh, wait, he already does, but we can ignore him. We can start fresh. I love you, Dayon." Dayon pulled his hand back. He straightened up. He looked at Lucinda, and for the first time, there was nothing in his eyes. No love, no hate, no anger. Just a vast, flat indifference. "You don't love me," Dayon said. "You don't even know me. You love the credit card. And now that the card is declined, you are trying to swipe a baby." He took a step back. "Go to Turbo," he said. "The baby needs his father, and that is not me." "But Dayon," Lucinda cried, "I have nowhere to go." "That is not my problem," Dayon said. He turned his back on her. He walked to the cooler, picked up his water bottle, and took a long pull. Then he pulled on his gloves. "Luther," he called out, "we have a slab to pour. Let's get back to it." The crew moved without hesitation. Engines roared. Hammers started swinging. The noise of the site swallowed Lucinda's sobbing whole. She sat there another minute stunned. She watched Dayon's back. She understood he was not going to turn around. He was not coming to save her. He was busy building something real, and she was no longer part of the blueprint. She stood up. She wrapped the blanket closer around the baby. She gave me one last look, pure venom, but said nothing. She knew I had won. She walked back across the gravel lot, her heels punching into the dirt, struggling to hold on to whatever dignity she had left, while carrying the full weight of her lies. I watched her go. I felt a pang of sorrow for the child, but I knew the boy would be all right. I would make sure Turbo had a job. I would make sure that child had a chance. But Lucinda had to take her lesson the hard way. I walked over to Dayon. He was down tying rebar. His face was set in a hard line. "You okay, son?" I asked. Dayon didn't break his rhythm. He twisted the wires and snipped it clean. "I'm fine, Dad," he said. He looked up and gave me a small, tired smile. "I just feel lighter, like I've been carrying a heavy bag I didn't even know was on my back." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Good," I said. "Keep working, we have a deadline." The leech was gone. The poison had drained away. My son was free. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I knew that the Grayfield name was safe. Not because of the money in the bank, because of the steel in my son's spine. The Harris County Courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat in the back row of courtroom 4B. I had on my best suit, but I did not feel like a CEO. I felt like a man watching a funeral from the pews. Lucinda stood at the defense table. She wore a modest blue dress she had likely picked up at a discount store. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked small. The arrogance that had carried her for years had drained away completely, leaving behind a trembling woman who was about to discover that choices carry a price. The prosecutor was a young man who had taken this case personally. He laid out the evidence with surgical precision. He walked the jury through the digital logs pulled from Dion's computer. He played the recording of the phone call in which Lucinda negotiated the price of the stolen data. He produced the contract she had signed with Preston Coyle. It was a trail of breadcrumbs that ran straight back to her greed. Lucinda's lawyer tried to frame her as a victim. He argued financial duress. He argued that she was a confused young mother, acting out of desperation. The judge wasn't buying a word of it. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes that had cataloged every lie ever told in a courtroom. She looked at Lucinda not with pity, but with disappointment. Lucinda wept on the stand. She looked to the back of the room where I sat. Her eyes were begging for mercy. She wanted me to rise. She wanted me to tell the judge it was all a misunderstanding. She wanted the checkbook opened one final time. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested on my knees. I didn't look away. I gave her the dignity of witnessing her own fate, but I did not throw her a line. The verdict came back in 2 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of corporate espionage and 1 count of attempted fraud. Lucinda had to grip the table when she stood for sentencing. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. The judge adjusted her glasses. Lucinda Grayfield. She said, "You attempted to destroy a legacy you had no hand in building. You betrayed your family for personal gain. You have shown no remorse, only regret that you were caught. The sentence was not prison time. Prison would have been too easy. Prison comes with 3 meals and a mattress." The judge handed her something far heavier. 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution. She was ordered to pay back the $10,000 she had taken from Preston Coyle, plus legal fees, plus a fine of $50,000. Lucinda gasped. "I don't have that kind of money," she sobbed. "Then you will work," the judge said. "You will find a job. Your wages will be garnished and you will repay every cent. Miss a payment and you will go to jail." The gavel came down, a sharp final sound. Lucinda was led away by the bailiff to be processed. She looked back one last time. She didn't see me. She saw the ghost of the life she had thrown away. She was 29 years old. She was a felon. She was in debt. And she was alone. Justice was not a lightning bolt from the heavens. It was the slow grinding weight of a monthly payment plan that would keep reminding her of her greed for the next 10 years. I walked out of the courthouse into bright autumn sunlight. I pulled in a long breath. The air tasted clean. I didn't feel happy. I felt resolved. The tumor had been cut out. Now came the question of whether the patient had survived. 6 months passed. The leaves burned gold and then let go, leaving the trees bare and skeletal. The Allen Parkway construction site had been transformed. Where the steel skeleton once stood, a gleaming tower of glass now rose against the sky. I pulled my truck up to the gate. I didn't announce myself. I put on my hard hat and walked onto the site. The noise was enormous saws biting through wood drills, screaming men calling out orders across the floors. The symphony of progress. I went looking for the foreman. Luther had retired the month before. He'd earned that rest. I had appointed a new foreman, a man who started at the very bottom. I found him near the loading dock. Dayon was standing with a clipboard squaring off against a delivery driver who was trying to offload substandard lumber. "I ordered grade A," Dayon said. His voice had a rough edge to it like gravel rolling in a mixer. "This is grade B. It is warped. Look at the grain." The driver pushed back. "Look, buddy, it is all the same once you paint it." "No." Dayon stepped forward. He was in a faded gray t-shirt, stained with sweat and oil. His arms had filled out with hard muscle. His skin was darkened from months under the open sky. He had a scar on his cheek from a snapping wire. He looked capable. He looked dangerous. "It is not the same," Dayon said. "My name is on this building. You put bad wood in my walls, the walls crack. The walls crack, my reputation cracks. Load it back up. Bring me what I paid for. Get off my site." The driver studied Dayon's face. He saw the set jaw. He saw the eyes that didn't waver. He nodded and climbed back into his truck. Dayon turned around. He saw me standing there. He didn't panic. He didn't smooth his shirt or try to brush the dirt from his hands. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey, Foreman," I said. "How's the schedule?" 2 days ahead, Dayon said, tapping the clipboard with a pencil. "I reorganized the plumbing crew. They were burning time waiting on the framers. I put them on a staggered shift. Saved us 40 man-hours this week." I nodded. "That is smart." "I learned it from Luther," Dayon said. He turned and looked up at the tower, at the glass catching and holding the clouds. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It is," I agreed. "You know, Dad, Dayon said, dragging a rag across his forehead. I used to think the beauty was in the ribbon cutting, the champagne, the photographs. And now? I asked. Now? Dayon said, his eyes dropping to his dirty boots. I know the beauty is in the rebar, in the things nobody ever sees. It is knowing that if a tornado tears through this block, this building stands because I watched every pore. I checked every bolt. He looked up at me. His eyes were clear. The entitlement was simply gone. The boy who used to demand a trust fund had ceased to exist. The man standing in front of me was a builder. Wash up, I said. I am hungry. Dayon checked his watch. I've got another hour, Dad. I still have to sign off on the electrical inspection. I will wait, I said. An hour later, we were sitting in a booth at a steakhouse. Not the white tablecloth kind where we used to go. This place had sawdust on the floor and neon beer signs glowing in the windows. Dayon ordered a ribeye steak. He ate with the appetite of a man who had burned 3,000 calories before noon. When the check arrived, I reached for my wallet out of habit. I had paid for every meal Dayon had ever eaten. Dayon reached over and covered my hand with his. His palm was rough. The calluses felt like sandpaper against my skin. No, Dad, he said. I looked at him. I've got this, Dayon said. He pulled out a battered leather wallet. No black card inside. Just a debit card from a local credit union and a fold of cash. He counted out 3 $20 bills and a 10. He laid them on the table. I made overtime this week, he said. I looked at the money. $70. It was nothing in the ledger of my bank account, a rounding error, but for Dayon, it was everything. It was sweat. It was back pain. It was early mornings and nights that ran long. It is the best money I have ever seen, I said. Dayon smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. I heard about Lucinda, he said. I nodded. 5 years of probation. I hope she finds peace, Dayon said. You are not angry? I asked. No, he shook his head. I was for a long time. I was angry at her. I was angry at you. I was angry at the whole world. But anger is heavy, Dad. It is like hauling a bag of cement that you never set down. I set it down. I am just busy now. I have a crew to lead. I have a building to finish. He took a drink of water. Dad, he said. Yeah. I don't want the CEO job back, he said. I set my fork down. You don't know, Dayon said. I am not a suit, at least not yet. I want to stay on the site. I want to build. Maybe in 10 years when my knees give out, I'll come sit in the office. But right now, I need to be where the work is. I looked at him. Pride swelled in my chest with an intensity that was almost painful. I had broken him down to nothing. I had stripped everything away, and he had rebuilt himself into something stronger than I had ever dared imagine. Okay, Foreman, I said. The job is yours. We finished the meal. We talked about concrete mixtures. We talked about crane load capacities. We talked about the football game. We talked the way 2 men talk, 2 builders, 2 gray fields. We walked out into the cool night air together. See you at 6, Dayon said. 6 sharp, I said. He climbed into his truck. It was old. It was dented. But it fired on the first turn of the key. I stood under the street lamp and watched him pull away. It took me a moment standing there to understand what I was feeling. The war was over. I had lost a dependent, but I had gained a son, and that was a trade I would make every single day of the week. Justice had been served, but more than that, redemption had been earned. The ink on those contracts was barely dry when I called the last meeting. A crisp November morning. The Houston air was sharp, biting cold. I didn't hold it in the glass-walled conference room at the top of the building. I held it in the equipment warehouse. A vast space that smelled of machine oil and sawdust and honest labor. 200 men and women stood in front of me. They were the beating heart of this company. They were the ones who poured concrete in the pouring rain. They were the ones who hung drywall in brutal summer heat. They were the ones who walked off the job 6 months ago and followed me when all I had was a rusted truck and a grudge. They stood there in their safety vests and hard hats, coffee cups in hand. They looked worn down, but they looked proud, waiting for me to speak. They figured I'd talk about profits, maybe the new pieces of skyline we were reshaping. Or maybe they thought I was about to hand the company back to my son. Dayon was standing in the front row. No suit. Work boots and a flannel shirt. Hands crossed in front of him. I looked at those hands. They weren't soft anymore. They were scarred. They were strong. The hands of a man who knew what a hammer actually weighs. I climbed up onto a stack of pallets that served as my stage. I adjusted the microphone. The feedback squealed for a moment, then settled into a low hum. 40 years ago, I started this company with a shovel and a prayer, I said. My voice bounced off the metal rafters. I wanted to put up buildings that would outlast me. I wanted to leave my mark on this city, and I did. We built the skyline. We built the hospitals. We built the schools. I paused. I scanned the faces in front of me. But a building is nothing but a pile of rocks without the people who stack them, I went on. For a long time I believed this company was mine, my property, my kingdom. I was wrong. I picked up the stack of documents from the table beside me. This company doesn't belong to me, I said, and it sure as hell doesn't belong to my son. A murmur moved through the crowd. Feet shifted. Eyes moved toward Dion. Dion didn't flinch. His gaze stayed locked on me. He already knew what was coming. We'd talked it through over bad coffee in a diner at 4 a.m. It belongs to you, I said. I held up the papers. Effective immediately, I am transferring 100% of the ownership of Grayfield Construction to an employee stock ownership plan. I am retiring. I am cashing out. But I am not handing this to a competitor. I'm not handing it to Wall Street. I'm handing it to the people standing in this room. Dead silence. The silence of pure shock. Every single one of you is now a shareholder, I said. From the foreman down to the newest apprentice, you own the trucks. You own the drills. You own the profits. You answer to nobody but each other. If the company thrives, you prosper. If it falls apart, you bear that too. It's in your hands now. I spotted Luther near the back. He'd come out of retirement just for this. He pulled off his hat and wiped his eyes. I watched Big Broderick stare at his own hands, as if trying to confirm they were really holding something real. But who's going to run it? Someone called from the back. We know how to build. We don't know how to file taxes. We have brought in a board of directors, I said. People who know finance and law, but they work for you. They serve at the will of the employee committee. I looked down at Dayon. We also need a project manager, I said. Someone who knows the numbers, but also knows the sweat. Someone who has seen things from the penthouse and from the bottom of a ditch. I gestured toward Dayon. Dayon Grayfield stepped forward. He walked up to the pallets. He turned to face the crowd. No arrogance in how he stood. He didn't puff out his chest. He looked humble. The crowd studied him. 6 months ago, they would have booed him off that stage. 6 months ago, they would have walked out. But they had watched him bleed. They'd watched him eat the same dry sandwiches. They'd watched him stay late fixing mistakes that weren't even his to fix. I am nominating Dion Grayfield for the position of senior project manager. He is not the CEO, I said. He has no corner office. He answers to the board of laborers. A majority vote from the shift supervisors can send him home. I looked out at the crowd. Do you accept him? A long beat. Nobody spoke. The tension hung heavy like smoke in still air. Then Big Broderick stepped forward. He looked at Dion. He looked at the scar on Dayon's cheek. He works hard, Broderick said. He is not fast, but he works hard, and he doesn't complain about the porta potties anymore. A ripple of laughter rolled through the room. Warm laughter. I vote yes, Broderick said. I vote yes, Luther called out. I vote yes, another voice followed. Before long, the whole room was nodding. Not a cheer exactly. An acknowledgement. A contract sealed in mutual respect. Dayon took the microphone. His hand didn't shake. Thank you, he said. His voice was quiet. I won't let you down. I used to think I was above this work. I used to believe I was entitled to your respect just because of my last name. I was an idiot. He looked over at me. My father showed me that you can't inherit a legacy. You have to build it, he said. I'm just a builder now, and I'm proud to work for you. He passed the microphone back. He stepped down and rejoined the workers. He didn't stand apart from them. He stood among them, one gray shirt and a sea of gray shirts. I felt a tightening in my throat. I pushed it down. Meeting adjourned. I said, get back to work. You're burning daylight and you're paying for it now. The crowd exploded into cheers. Caps flew into the air. Hands were shaken. People walked out of that warehouse with a different stride. They walked like owners. I stayed behind. I watched the room clear out. I watched my son leave with his crew, talking about concrete density and delivery schedules. He didn't look back at me. He didn't need to. He had his own road now. I walked out to my truck. The sun was high overhead. I drove away from the headquarters. I drove past the skyline I had spent 40 years helping raise. I drove through 40 years worth of memories. I drove north. I drove until city gave way to suburbs, and suburbs gave way to trees. I drove until asphalt turned to gravel. I pulled up to a small cabin beside a lake. It was quiet out there, nothing but wind moving through the pines and water against the dock. I climbed out of the truck, left my phone on the dashboard buzzing with notifications. Lawyers wanting signatures, reporters wanting statements, financial advisors wanting to talk through my portfolio. I left it all behind. I walked down to the dock. I settled onto a wooden bench I'd built with my own hands. I picked up my fishing rod, baited the hook, cast the line into the water. The ripples spread outward in perfect concentric circles, breaking apart the reflection of the clouds above. I thought about what it means to be a father. People believe that loving a child means giving them everything, that it means shielding them from pain, that it means smoothing the road so they never trip. I used to believe that. I gave Dayon every soft thing I never had, the easy life, and it came close to destroying him. It made him into a man who thought the world owed him a living. Real love is a harder thing. Real love is watching your child fall and keeping your hands at your sides. Real love is letting them go hungry so they understand what food means. Real love is letting them be cold so they understand what shelter means. It broke me to ignore those 55 calls. It tore me open to see him sleeping in a car. Every instinct I had screamed at me to step in, write a check, make it right. But if I had made it right, he would have stayed wrong. I looked out at the water. The bobber dipped beneath the surface. Something was biting. I reeled it in, slow and steady. It was a fight. The fish pulled. I pulled back. That's how it goes. And in that struggle lived the beauty of it all. Dayon was going to be all right. He wasn't wealthy anymore. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't running any company. But he was a man. He could stand in front of a mirror and know that the face staring back had earned its right to be here. I worked the hook free from the fish, a small base. I held it a moment, taking in its fight. Then I let it go back into the water. Go on, I whispered. Live. I settled back on that bench. The sun was going down, bleeding the sky in deep orange and violet. My phone was still sitting in the truck. I had no use for it. The story had run its course. The text message that set all of this in motion felt like something from another lifetime. Don't come back, he had said. And I hadn't come back. Not to the company, not to the old version of myself. I had pushed forward and I had pulled him forward right along with me. I drew in a long breath of cold air. What I felt was peace, deep settled, abiding peace. That is where this road finally ended for me. Or maybe it is more honest to say that is where it began again. I spent years believing that love meant protection, that a good father cleared the obstacles before his child ever saw them. What this journey cost me was the comfortable version of that belief. What it gave me in return was something truer. I believe God does not allow the people we love to stay broken forever, but sometimes He asks us to step back and let the breaking do its work. That was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it was the right thing. If you are somewhere in the middle of a story like this one, a family, revenge story of your own, where betrayal came from inside the house, I want you to hear these 4 things. First, what you build can be taken, but what you know cannot. Protect your knowledge like a locked room, only you hold the key to. Second, real love sometimes looks like silence. Letting someone face the consequences of their own choices is not cruelty, it is the deepest form of respect. Third, if someone tries to erase your name, remind yourself who wrote it in the first place. Identity is not a document. It cannot be stolen. Fourth, for adults, 50 plus who have given their lives to building something, do not measure your legacy by who inherits it. Measure it by whether it outlives the ego that created it. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, a friend, a sibling, anyone who is fighting a quiet battle. And if you have not already subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, there is more where this came from. Thank you for listening all the way through. Take good care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.